Okay, I'm seeing that we're streaming. Are we good to go?
No, hold on 1 second.
Okay.
What we're doing is turning off chat on YouTube, so we avoid the public comment. Okay. Sid, go ahead. And go ahead and you can hit record and then start the webinar.
Dion, it looks like you'll need to do it since you're host now. Sorry.
Those are the magic words, I think. Recording in progress. We're getting ready to go. Team, just making sure it says we're live. Okay, great. Hello, everyone across the screen and out in virtual land. It is Thursday, February 16, 2023, and this is a special meeting of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission specific to Colorado's wolf restoration and management plan. Before I make a couple of comments, I'll ask Laura to call the roll.
Adams. See her yet? Bailey.
Here.
Blecka.
Here.
Haskett.
Here.
May.
Present.
Otero.
Present.
Phillips.
Here.
Reading.
Present.
Touchton.
Yes.
Barty.
Later. Yep.
Chair Hauser.
Here.
Thank
Okay, I think at minimum we have a quorum.
you. You do.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to dive right in a moment. For the commission and members of the public who may have heard these comments before, they may be a repeat, but for those who have not joined us, I will provide the same preamble, so bear with me if you don't mind. So this evening marks the 5th hearing Colorado Parks and Wildlife is holding on the draft wolf plan, which was released to the public on December 9th. A few reminders for those of you who are new to these proceedings, and just a few of the updated protocols to ensure fairness and decorum, and we followed those last week in Rifle. So we all know that Proposition 114 passed in November of 2020 and is now state law. And since that time, CPW, which has been working in close conjunction with the Volunteer Stakeholders Advisory Group and the Scientifically Focused Technical Working Group and myriad other stakeholders, has worked hard to prepare the draft wolf restoration and management plan. This draft plan represents the division's best effort to develop a blueprint and common sense approach to implement Proposition 114, which is now state law. So the goal is to develop a plan that a broad-based majority of the public will support, and one that represents reasonable compromise, viability, and has room to evolve over time with lessons learned and wisdom gained. Preparing the draft plan, we all know, was no easy task, and the state of Colorado is privileged to have some of the very best scientists in the country working hard for CPW. The staff assigned to this effort, again, deserve a great deal of credit and appreciation for managing a difficult task over the past 2 years. Their work has embodied skill, professionalism, patience, and diplomacy. We've already held 4 meetings on this plan in a short 6 weeks period of time. Notably, these meetings have been in addition to the regular work of the staff and the volunteer CPW Commission. At each of these meetings, staff provided an overview of the plan, which we'll do again today, which followed numerous updates to the Commission on wolf restoration over the past 18 months. So this has all come together in one document. While little of it in terms of content and concepts are new to us, we have seen them through the reports from the Keystone Policy Center over the last 1.5 years or so. The Commission's goal at this point, at each of its prior wolf plan meetings, has been to get a better understanding of the lengthy and complex plan and to hear from the public. In tonight's virtual meeting, we will dedicate a majority of this session to input by members of the public who have not yet been able to join us in person. Our effort here is to make sure that we're as accessible as possible. So again, a quick refresher regarding the Commission's legal role in developing Colorado's wolf restoration plan. This volunteer commission must necessarily rely heavily on the resources and deep expertise of the division and the staff. With this support and by law, the commission is ultimately responsible for developing the plan, making the difficult decisions in it, and formally adopting the plan this May in Glenwood Springs. There is not another plan that this commission will consider. The law also requires the plan to be based on the quote, best scientific data available. This plan will adhere to that standard. By law, the commission is also responsible to quote, hold statewide hearings to acquire information to be considered in developing the wolf plan, including scientific, economic, and social considerations pertaining to wolf restoration. Tonight marks the end of the quote unquote statewide hearings process. We will hold our next meeting on February 22nd in Adams County on the Front Range, which will be a critical opportunity for the commission to give final direction to staff on the plan. We are thankful for the public input we've received to the plan on date, both in person and in online comments, which are still available and being accepted at www.wolfengagementco.org. The Commission's ground rules and best practices for governance apply to this process as well. Importantly, we don't speak to the public, we don't speak publicly, opine on social media, or interview with the media as individuals. Rather, this commission deliberates and acts as one body, so it is requested that members of the press and the public respect this distinction. Finally, just a couple of ground rules before I turn it over to the staff regarding public comment and participation tonight, and clearly this is a little different given we're in a virtual environment. We have already received substantial in-person public comment on wolf reintroduction really over the last year or so, but specifically at our recent meetings in Gateway, Colorado Springs, Gunnison, and Rifle. For those who wish to provide public comment tonight, we've provided you with updated guidance regarding this process. And to accommodate as much public comment as possible, each person will get 2 minutes, elected officials 3 minutes. It is not permissible to allocate your time to another speaker. If you exceed that time by more than 5 seconds, your microphone will be turned off by the magicians that are behind the scenes. We also request respectfully that public comments reflect the draft plan and are respectful of its actual content. For example, the words quote unquote trophy hunting or quote unquote trophy are not in the plan, nor are they found anywhere in Title 33, which is CPW's statute. Similarly, debating the outcome of Proposition 114 is also without merit and unproductive. This commission agrees with and fully respects our charge to comply with the outcome of the ballot measure and current law, and we will do so completely and fully. At the end of the day, Colorado Parks and Wildlife will strive to restore gray wolves to Colorado in ways that enable a self-sustaining population, reassure and validate ranchers and agricultural producers regarding their livelihoods and their heritage, and celebrate a truly historic achievement in our country for wildlife advocates, among which include every one of the members of this commission. So thank you again to this body for again giving of your time and your evening and your personal bandwidth and your service to our state. So I will turn it over now to Reed DeWalt and Eric Odell, who will take us into the next steps. And I think they also have fairly timely information for us this evening. So Reed, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening. Good evening, commissioners, directors, members of the audience. It's great to be with you again. I'm Reed DeWalt, Assistant Director of Aquatic, Terrestrial, and Natural Resources. And with me tonight, I have Eric Odell, who is our technical lead for this project and a species conservation manager, and also Luke Hoffman, who is our game damage coordinator. Both of them are available to speak later in this meeting. I just want to give some thoughts from staff as we go into the meeting, and much of it will be repetitive to what Madam Chair just said, but I thought they would be important to share as well. So this plan this plan is a plan to reintroduce and reestablish a population of wolves in the state, an effort that we at CPW take very seriously. We also have to develop a plan to assist those who are impacted both positively and negatively by the presence of wolves. We expect wolves to do very well in the state and to expand and to disperse from the areas where they are reintroduced. The statute provides clear direction on what has to be included in the plan, and thanks to the guidance from our technical working group and our stakeholder advisory group, along with our CPW staff, we feel that a constructive plan has been presented. This is not the last time CPW or the commission will discuss and define wolf management, but it gets us down the road of reestablishing a species to the state that hasn't been here for nearly 60 years. We thank those who have already provided written and oral comment and are pleased to offer this virtual opportunity tonight to those of you who have not been otherwise able to attend one of the PCW meetings in person. So I just open with those comments. I do want to remind, as Chair Hauser mentioned, that our next meeting is February 22nd. It will be at the Adams County Fairgrounds, and information on that will be available on our website. And just to the commission, I think you all know this and you've received that, but that's really where we expect to receive some pretty consensus level direction to staff at that meeting on changes or additions you would like to the plan, so then we can go forward in the month of March and make those changes to the plan so that we can present them to you in Steamboat in April and in Glenwood Springs in May, with final adoption of the plan and any associated regulations in that May 3rd and 4th meeting. So in regards to the information that Chair Hauser mentioned that we have to share, it's important for folks to know that the proposed 10J rule has been released by the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's been a topic of much discussion in these meetings and in all of this wolf planning. So at long last, it's been released, which is great news and a really positive step forward in this planning effort. I would encourage interested public who want to comment or see that rule to go to the Fish and Wildlife Service webpage. It's fws.gov/Colorado Wolf, and all necessary information around that plan and planning process can be found there. I do want to mention a series of public meetings that the Fish and Wildlife Service will be holding to receive some public input on the proposed rule. The first one will be March 14th in Grand Junction at the Grand Junction Convention Center, starting at 5:30. They'll have one the next night in Craig, starting at 5:30 as well, and it'll be at the Moffat County Pavilion. And then they'll have one on March 16th in the town of Walden at the Wattenberg Center, also starting at 5:30. And then there will be a virtual option on March 22nd at 5:30. And any necessary information can be found on that webpage I mentioned earlier.
And
So with that-
Reed, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in. We recognize that those dates conflict exactly with the March CPW Commission meeting, super conveniently. So we will take that under advisement. And if anything changes either on our end or the Fish and Wildlife Service hearings, we will let you know promptly.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. And a reminder as well to those who may not be super familiar is that is a related process, but a separate process to ours. So it's important that the public comments on that process as well, as comments are vital to that part of the planning process as well for the Fish and Wildlife Service. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair, and we'll sit and be ready to answer comments later.
Okay, great. And I would just say, yes, recognizing those are two separate things. I would speculate that commissioners, members of this commission would be interested in either listening in or being part of those hearings. So the fact that they conflict is complicated at best. So we just learned this today, so we will see what we can do without promises made. I also misspoke or maybe said something that might have been confusing, in that there will be an opportunity for public comment on February 22nd in Denver as well. So please know that that's available to members of the public in person. And it's partly why we will be at the fairgrounds, because we do anticipate a large audience at that particular hearing. So Reed, what else? Anything else from you all before we go into public comments?
I don't have
or any
anything.
questions from the commission?
Yeah, I don't have anything additional, but we can definitely
Okay.
answer questions if there are any right now.
Okay, questions and comments from any members of the commission before we go to public comment. And we will take public comment, and we will take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll complete public comment. And then we will have an opportunity at the end for, as we have done in other meetings, for any other questions and comments that come up through the course of the evening. Commissioner Bailey.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask, with the 10J rule being released, the draft rule being released, I'm just wondering if there's going to be any space for additional discussion on what's in it and how that intersects with the plan at either the March, April, or May meetings.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Bailey. It's definitely something we can discuss, and maybe the March meeting would be good for that. Obviously, it's a draft rule. There's a 60-day comment period now, so we could definitely go over what's in that and maybe ask our partners with the Fish and Wildlife Service to join us as well. So thank you for that comment.
Okay, so for Laura and Jeff and others, as we develop that agenda, let's try to build that in, or read, if you can just remember that as part of your portion of that. And it looks like we do have Commissioner Adams with us now, Laura, for roll call. Anyone else before we move on? And we'll turn it to Katie. I'm not seeing any hands. If I don't see your emoji hand raised, just let me know that you want to jump in. I don't see any at this point. So we'll turn it to Katie for public comment, and the commission looks forward to listening to public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Katie Lanter, Policy and Planning Supervisor for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So I'll be helping to manage the public comment this evening. What we did is we had a comment, a Google form where people could register in advance to provide public comment. As the chair mentioned, each person will have 2 minutes of time. I'm going to show you right now that there will be a timer displayed on the screen with your 2 minutes. When you reach 30 seconds, there'll be a chime sound and the color will turn from green to yellow around the circle of the timer. And when your time is finished, there will be a bell sound and it will turn red. And as the chair mentioned, if you go, 5 seconds past the end time, we will be muting you and moving you back over. Right now, you all who signed up for public comment are logged on as attendees. What we'll do is I will call the next speaker and the person on deck. When your name is called, we'll promote you from an attendee to a panelist. There will probably be a small delay as that move is made. Once you are a panelist, if you're familiar with Zoom, you're welcome to turn on, unmute yourself in the lower left-hand corner and turn on your video if you'd like. If you're not familiar with that, we can also help you with that. You may just need to hit accept on your end when we try to unmute you. With that, I think we can go ahead and get started. So first up, we'll have Julie Kolar, followed by Gail Bell. So if we get, and we had Julie in 2 different places. So we're going to move both Julies and see what happens. Let's make sure Julie's moved over. Just one moment.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like your camera on, Julie?
No, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak within this forum. I know that my comments this evening may not resonate with the entire public. However, I know that my observations and opinions are shared by many, including the regional public land managers that I've spoken directly with. My concerns are within 2 primary topics. The first is cost. I'm not sure how a plan that is supposed to start in a matter of months can be successful when funding and staff are not in place. After listening to the December PWC meeting, it was clear that no direct funding source had been identified or secured to facilitate the plan, not the expenses or the staff. The dollar amount was estimated as, quote, over $1 million. And then to quote chapter 9 of the plan, implementing this plan will create logistical and financial challenges. Division's capacity through additional personnel will have to be increased to ensure that the plan is properly implemented. And also to quote, the plan proposes programs that do not currently exist, both to monitor wolf and prey populations and to mitigate impacts of wolf depredation and livestock. Successful implementation of the plan will require additional staff, financial resources, environmental reviews, et cetera, end quote. As a member of the Basalt Parks, Open Space and Trails Advisory Committee to the Town Council, I've heard many times about how understaffed and underfunded our regional CPW office is. And since it is assumed that wolves will be released in or near Eagle County in the first year, the deficit is ever more concerning. My second comment is regarding elk as well as deer, bighorn sheep, and ground nesting birds and their well-being and population. In this article in the Aspen Daily News just this past December, I quote, Colorado Parks and Wildlife is concerned about low calf survival rates in elk herds in the Roaring Fork Valley. So I'm not sure how it's helpful then to introduce wolves into an already struggling population. And I see that my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Gail Bell, followed by Gary Vicentainer. So we'll go ahead and get Gail moved over. Gail, you can there. We can see you. You unmute. All right, go ahead, Gail.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Gail Bell, and I am one of the two proponents of Ballot Initiative 114, Now the Law in Colorado. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you about several concerns that I feel you must address. Ballot Initiative 114 clearly states that wolves will be a non-game species. The current terminology in your plan allows for the possibility of lethal control in the future, and it's clearly in violation of the intent of the ballot initiative and the law. You must immediately remove this provision from your plan. Additionally, 114 specifies that the plan must follow the best available science. Yet the number of wolves that you reference to be reintroduced is totally negligent with regard to current best available science, which clearly specifies 750 to 1,000 wolves in order to sustain a biologically and genetically successful population. This too immediately must be corrected. It is essential that coexistence techniques must be required to ensure that potential conflicts be mitigated and lessened. We, the people, expect that CPW will respect and implement the vote of the people of Colorado. Nothing less will be acceptable. Our goal is to be a model for every state and the world, and with your support, we will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Gary Vicentainer, followed by Seneca Woolman. Gary, you should be able to go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the draft Colorado Wolf Restoration and Management Plan. I would like to thank CPW staff, the Wildlife Commission, and the stakeholder and technical advisory group for the time and effort they put on developing the plan, of which I am generally supportive of with some changes. First, there needs to be a dedicated funding source with sufficient funding for implementation and administration of the plan, along with adequate compensation for producers and livestock losses. The 10J rule needs to be in place before any wolves are released on the landscape. The need for lethal take needs to remain a part of the plan. Without this provision, the only remedy available to producers is non-lethal mitigation, which has only been marginally effective in other states. Radio collaring also needs to be done, which is part of the plan. And this is essential for monitoring the location of the packs. And this information, will be critical when conflicts occur. And this information should also be passed along to livestock producers in the area. Compensation needs to occur for both direct and indirect costs and should be covered for all classes of livestock with no limit in dollar amounts. The $8,000 amount as proposed is extremely low for present day values and will be greatly underfunded in the future. Again, thanks for this opportunity to comment, and I appreciate. Thanks to you all.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Seneca Woolman, followed by Kim Bean. All right, Seneca, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone who has been working on this plan and for the opportunity to address you. I am really excited that the majority of Coloradans agree that we need wolves back in our state. Our ecosystem is out of balance, and bringing wolves back will go a long way in restoring equilibrium to our wild spaces. My comments on the plan are as follows. Phase 4 of the plan, referring to when wolves may potentially be classified as a game species and allow for them to be hunted in the future, must be removed. Colorado voters defined wolves as a non-game species when Proposition 114 was passed, and there was never any intention to leave a path to game status. Secondly, CPW's proposed thresholds for downlisting and delisting wolves are incredibly low and must be increased with the addition of a geographic distribution requirement. So I urge CPW to raise these various thresholds in this plan in accordance with scientific research, as currently they aim to simply prevent extinction and not to ensure restoration and recovery. And lastly, while the draft plan does acknowledge the fact that livestock losses are very low in states with established wolf populations, it spends an exorbitant amount of time discussing the killing of wolves rather than non-lethal management of wolf livestock conflict. A system of compensation for proven livestock losses due to wolves is absolutely necessary, but CPW should require that non-lethal methods of deterring predation are used prior to compensation being awarded, and killing wolves should never be the first defense of livestock. So thanks again to everyone working on this plan and to my fellow Coloradans weighing in, and I really look forward to us creating a healthier and wilder Colorado going forward.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Kim Bean, followed by Kathleen Willard.
Hi there.
Kim, go ahead.
Chair Hauser and commissioners, my name is Kim Bean and I'm with Wolves of the Rockies. I've been fighting for wolves for going into second decade, actually a few years into a second decade, for the state of Montana, where killing wolves and gearing up to kill grizzlies is based on fear, propaganda, and special interests, and not based on science and what is best for healthy, balanced ecosystems. Colorado has a chance to do this right. But first, CPW needs to break away from the state agency norm and start holding the opposition to the same standard that you do the pro-wolf and wildlife constituent, and I am your constituent. When the lies and vitriol are being spewed by those that speak out against wolves, you do not hold them accountable, you do not set them straight, and you allow them to believe and spread misinformation, which continues the division and the inability to come together to find solutions. This is a problem. It is time that CPW and other state agencies stop the management of wildlife for the sake of hunter opportunity. That's nothing more than game farming our wildlife for the sake of money. The commercialization of our wildlife is not management. Wolves have a place on our landscape. They're not vermin, they're not evil. They are simply wild that play an important part in nature, something that we, the human animal, should study a little closer for the good of our own. Wolves of the Rockies has attempted to work with state agencies over the years, and we've prided ourselves on not litigating. We've always preferred to work with and not against groups or agencies. However, we have found that when all voices are not being heard and wildlife is not a consideration in management decisions, it has become the only means to bring management to the center. I am here for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Kathleen Willard, followed by James Dones. Go ahead, Kathleen.
You see me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kathleen Willard. When Proposition 114 passed during the height of the pandemic, it gave me joy, hope, and inspiration. I believed it would rewrite the negative narrative of wolves in the New West and leave behind the Old West history of extermination, demonization, and hunting of wolves. The law contains several words and one foundational sentence that gave me hope. The words are endangered species and non-game species. The foundational sentence is gray wolf means non-game wildlife of the species Canis lupus, implying Colorado would be a safe haven for wolves. Fast forward December 2023. The CPW draft plan includes both delisting gray wolves from the Endangered Species Act and the killing of wolves in 3 ways: hunting, lethal control, and issuing permits for ranchers to kill conflict wolves. How is it possible for any animal protected by the Endangered Species Act to be hunted? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can delist any animal by using the 10J rule and give power to manage any endangered species to the state. Because of the 10J rule, wolf hunting seasons are management tools from Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Wisconsin. Recently, Idaho passed a law to kill 90% of their wolves. Montana passed a law to kill 85% of their wolves. 1/3 of the wolf population was killed in the first few days of their first 2. This state closed the season early. How can hunting be the future of wolves in Colorado? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have James Dones, followed by Suzanne Roller.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, James.
Okay, great, thank you. Madam Chair, Madam Secretary, Acting Director Dugan, and members of the Commission Board, I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is James Dones. I represent, I've been in Colorado for a while, and so just more of a representative of this great state, so thank you. Outside of my excitement over the diversity in this board, it wasn't until I sat on a few meetings that I saw the passion that you have for wildlife and the state of Colorado. I have 2 requests today. Game management should no more be put in the hands of voters than I should be allowed to fly the space shuttle. We should leave it to the professionals with over 125 years of experience. Please, please do whatever you can to help this not happen again. Second, in all of the excitement of advocates pushing the what, there was woeful negligence in figuring out the how. Now we are in this for $3.5 million and counting. I could be wrong, but if I read section 33, the commission and associated parties tell the General Assembly what funds are needed, and the General Assembly figures out where to get the money. Please tell them. I want to make a comment on something Commissioner Touchton and the other commissioners discussed regarding phase 4 and the authority of the commission. I've read the section 33 and the sections referenced by it. I repeatedly see the commission shall. It seems to me the state of Colorado had the good sense to give the commission quite a bit of authority. Please use it. On phase 4, I couldn't care less if it stays or goes. The law, as I read it, says the commission shall manage the wolves and protect the landowners affected by the reintroduction. Management includes removal and the other ways to remove, and there are other ways to remove wolves other than hunting. Please use them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Suzanne Roller, followed by Philip Anderson. Suzanne, go ahead.
Thank you. 49% of Colorado voters did not support the ballot measure that mandated reintroduction of gray wolves to Colorado. The narrow margin by which the measure passed indicates that non-traditional approaches to managing wolves does not have widespread support. RMEF encourages the commission to follow the proven and sustainable North American model of wildlife management for wolves. We appreciate the plan's acknowledgement that elk and other ungulates are socially, economically, and ecologically important to Colorado. Maintaining robust ungulate populations to support these existing priorities and the additional predation by wolves will require increased monitoring by CPW. Declining elk cow-calf ratios in multiple DAUs is an existing problem that is likely to be exacerbated by the introduction of wolves. If wolf predation leads to deer and elk populations falling below objectives, then active wolf population management must remain a viable response, particularly in phase 3. Reducing big game hunter quotas should not be the only response to declining elk and deer populations. RMEF supports the 4-phase approach for establishing the status of wolf management. The 5 breeding pair, 50 wolf count for 4 years, 50 breeding pair, 150 wolf count for 2 years is consistent with other recovery plans. The commission should resist efforts to raise these thresholds. Lethal removal to address depredation conflict must also be included as a management option. If it were a perfect world, we'd prefer to outline successfully that the plan would outline how successfully meeting phase 3 threshold would result in wolves being reclassified as a game species. A scientifically managed harvest season for wolves has been proven sustainable in both the Northern Rocky Mountain region and the Great Lakes. In summary, we prefer citizens taking of wolves via the North American model over other management options. As a whole, we support this plan as written. It's balanced and science-based, and we ask for phase 4 to remain in place. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Philip Anderson, followed by Gina DeGalliano. That one's a mouthful, sorry, Gina. But Philip next. Go ahead, Philip.
Well, I don't know if I can see you or you can see me, but here we go.
You're good.
I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the Colorado Wolf Restoration and Management Plan this evening. It would be unjust for me to say that since I live in Walden, I know everything there is to know about the devastations and that the reintroduction of wolves can bring to the ranching family, but I have some idea that it will affect us all in the end. I'm so very proud of the people who have put their lives on hold over the past year and a half to give input and life experiences to the development of this draft plan. Without your insight, dedication, and faith, success to this point would not have happened. In addition, I know that as a member of the Wildlife Commission, your responsibility to the people of Colorado is no small task. And I know that your decisions will help to continue the outstanding relationships that you have made with the private landowners, farmers and ranchers, and outfitters in this state going forward. I have just a few of my observations as we continue to improve upon the plan. I believe the whole implementation of this plan hinges on 2 issues: the 10J rule by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the funding to carry out top-of-the-line management of this species by what I believe to be the most dedicated group of individuals in our county, the men and women of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Currently, the Colorado Wolf Reintroduction Plan anticipates that the 10J rule will take effect before the reintroduction of wolves in the state. Reading up on that report just released by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service leaves me more confused than I was before. I'm not here to debate the structure of the plan of the 10J rule, but do feel that it must be in place before wolves can be on the ground. If the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finds themselves in litigation over the 10J rule before the paws hit the ground, then no wolves should be released.
Oh, sorry, I see I was muted. Next, we'll have Gina DiGalliardo, followed by Justin Smith. Go ahead, Gina.
Hi, thank you. I am a Coloradoan who's very proud of the fact that we're bringing wolves back. I worked very hard to talk to all my friends and family about this, so thank you for getting this plan in place. And I want to make a couple points. Those that I encourage to vote, and myself being a voter, really hung ourselves on the language non-lethal management, sorry, not managed as a non-game species. And I am totally against hunting of wolves. And I hope that the CPW does adhere to what the voters voted for. And that language did say that they would be managed as a non-game species. I'd also like to bring up the fact that wolves coming to Colorado will bring millions of dollars to our economy as it has for other states. And I hope CPW does take that into account. I am not opposed to compensating ranchers. They do deserve that. However, they should be held to first implementing strategies that are non-lethal based. All industries are held to standards, and as long as that is in place and they have to show that they've tried all non-lethal methods, that is fine. They should be compensated. And lastly, I hope CPW does not manage wolves based on elk and deer numbers like they do with the lions and bears. I'm concerned that they're going to turn and say they can manage wolves like that. So again, I'm so proud of our state, and I hope that wolves are managed as non-game species as we voted for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Justin Smith, followed by Tom Tucker. Justin, go ahead.
All right. Good evening. The wolf is often portrayed as a magnificent creature, a savior of biodiversity, and as a victim of hate. It is also commonly used as a facade behind which to push insidious agendas and ideologies to the detriment of those with the most to lose. As we've seen elsewhere, any efforts to properly manage a wolf population will be met with endless lawsuits. Meanwhile, the wolf numbers will soar. To make matters worse, these smart apex predators often evade delicate management practices, and the most effective means of population control, trapping, is already illegal in Colorado. The wolf draft is an impressive piece of work that should remain as is. To repeat so many others before me, some critical components are: 1, the implementation of the newly released 10J prior to reintroduction; 2, a thorough impact assessment and expanded funding; and 3, the inclusion of phase 4 with the mention of hunting as a possible option for management. As for hunting, one truly needs to look to the North American model of wildlife conservation to understand its importance. It also enables the everyday person like myself to put healthy organic meat into their freezer to feed their family. Finally, it is a cherished pastime for many that provides immense personal value while also teaching strong ethics, especially critical with our youth. Its relevance simply cannot be overstated. In conclusion, failing to plan for the worst with the utmost flexibility would be unfettered negligence. CPW should absolutely not be handcuffed, and those negatively impacted should not be left out to dry. Let's protect the wildlife we love so dearly, and let's protect what makes Colorado so special. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Tom Tucker, followed by Mary J. Terrellin. Tom, go ahead.
Make it? Okay, thank you. My My name's Tom Tucker. I live in the Western Slope, Northwest Colorado. I got a couple of thoughts about the WOOF program. The first one is financial, which seems to be a big one tonight. And the second one is local support. Concerning financial, there are coverages for the livestock producer for losses, although it seems that needs to be refined substantially, especially when you look at the wolf dog Klingel-Smith debacle near Meeker earlier late last year and what outcome was or wasn't there. We need some more work on that. But what I don't see is a lot of financial support for the communities like Meeker, Craig, Maybell. There's going to be some impact. And whether correct or not, if people perceive that the wolves are impacting the wildlife and they're losing money, they're not going to support it. Which takes me to my second point is local support. As you know, the ballot issue barely passed statewide. In the areas where it's going to be impacted the most, such as Northwest Colorado, it failed miserably. So if you don't have the people over there supporting the wolf introduction, it's just not going to work. For example, if you look at prohibition in the 30s, or you look at Colorado's marijuana law and how it butted up against the federal law. The federal law didn't work because Colorado didn't support it. We're seeing it right now with local support versus the sanctuary cities that go on the federal level. If they don't support it, it's not going to work. In my opinion, you need to do two things. You need to line up with the financial aspect, which has been mentioned, and if you're going to financially support the community other than the producers, and then you need to do a lot more outreach to get the local people where I live to say this is a good program, because right now the word on the street is we don't support it, and there needs to be more communication. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mary J. Turellen, followed by Alex Marks.
Hi, sorry, I'm in a dark place. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I was the volunteer coordinator for the Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund for a signature gathering for the ballot initiative. And I know that the intention of the voters when they approved Prop 114 to put it up for a vote was to protect these animals from lethal control. We had an army of amazing volunteers who spoke to many, many people all over the state. And we all heard the same thing, the same concern people voiced before they signed the petition. And that was, if we bring them back, will they be protected? Or are we bringing them back just to be gunned down? The loudest voices in the room at these sessions are against restoration, and ranchers have the powerful Cattlemen's Association backing them. And this creates a pretty intimidating environment and discourages many from showing up and speaking. But the fact is we voted to open our lands to this endangered species, and it's land that belongs to all Coloradans, not just to special interests. It may be too intimidating for people to come to one of these sessions, or maybe they believe there's no need since they've spoken at the ballot box. But Prop 114 passed because people believe that its wording would be honored. We also know that many more people would have voted for Prop 114 if it was not for the worry that these animals would be killed. When you talk about the slim margin, it's not because there wasn't more support for wolves, it's because people were not willing to support exactly what's happening now. That the appeasing of those who oppose the will of the voters has led to a heavy focus on lethal control in the management plan. Lethal control is not a science-supported practice, and Prop 114 mandates that wolves are not to be a game species in Colorado. That was at the heart of Prop 114. That's what voters intended, was to right a wrong that was committed long ago, not to repeat that wrong. So I appeal to you to honor this intent and take the unethical, cruel, and ineffective killing of wolves off the table. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Alex Marks, followed by Jesse Kruthout.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead,
Thank
Alex, unless you want your video on.
I wish to have my video off. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Alex Marks, and I'm from Golden, Colorado. And although the draft Colorado Wolf Restoration and Management Plan is a great foundation to establishing a healthy and starting community for the North American gray wolf, more needs to be done to allow all gray wolf species to migrate into the great state of Colorado. I am a firm believer in a balanced ecosystem. And as an apex predator, wolves bring that balance. This is why I love wolves so much. Colorado should be a genetic mixing ground for gray wolves as it was historically, and any gray wolf, regardless of subspecies or means of arrival, should be permitted to live in the state. Colorado's plan should focus on restoring a self-sustaining, geographically distributed population of gray wolves, allowing for the migration and or reintroduction of different gray wolf subspecies. Gray wolf subspecies should be allowed to reproduce, and their progeny should be permitted to live where they find suitable habitat within Colorado. Colorado, by its geographic placement, is a perfect land bridge and gateway for all gray wolves that live within the Rocky Mountain region, including the Mexican gray wolf community that is still struggling to maintain that thriving community along the borders of Arizona and New Mexico, and the already established northern gray wolf in Yellowstone National Park and other areas north, such as Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. These species should be not only allowed, but encouraged to come into Colorado to integrate and genetically cross-mix to create a more healthy community within this state. I hope the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission enhances its draft plan to allow better gateways and encourage the migration for not only these introduced gray wolves, but also other established communities in the surrounding states as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Jesse Kruthout, followed by Hans Smith.
Good evening.
Jesse, would you like your camera on? We can hear you, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
All right, thanks again. My name is Jesse Kruthout. I'm representing Gunnison County Stock Growers Association in the Upper Gunnison Basin. First of all, I just want to thank you all for your diligence and coming up with some solutions in this extremely complex and challenging task. I hope my comments will help provide some guidance on the next steps. Gunnison County Stock Growers has a long history of working to conserve and protect habitat in the Gunnison Basin. For the last 20 years, stock growers have worked diligently with Gunnison County, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and federal agencies to develop actions to protect the Gunnison sage grouse and its habitat. This leads me to my first point and major issue with the draft plan, in that it does the analysis of the wolf impact to threatened and sensitive species is inadequate or ignored. Second issue with the draft plan, it cannot be finalized until gray wolves and cannot be released into Colorado until 10J rule is adopted by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In fact, deterrent activities proposed in the plan could be considered illegal without the 10J rule. Third, CPW cannot release wolves in Colorado until it has adequate staff and resources to actively manage wolf populations. Fourth, the plan needs to provide compensation for mitigation cost, and per animal compensation limits are arbitrary. Fifth, 78% of Gunnison County is federal land. CPW desires to release wolves in Gunnison County precisely because the vast amount of federal land. There's no doubt releasing wolves in Gunnison County will impact other species and grazing on federal lands. Therefore, this plan needs to comply with all federal management and NEPA requirements. And lastly, the Gunnison County Stock Growers Association comment letter provides some details on these and other problems with the plan. We suggest that an updated draft be circulated to the public for another round of public.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Hans Smith, followed by Adam Van Valkenburg, and then Bob Terwilliger. I was asked to try to move more of you over at a time, so I'll start calling the next person, in this case, Hans Smith, and then the next two on deck, Adam Van Valkenburg and Bob Terwilliger. Attendees, also, if you are not logged in under your own name that you signed up for, if you could try hovering over your name and clicking on the dots to see if you can rename yourself, that would be helpful to me as well. All right, Han, it looks like you're good to go.
Thank you. Yeah,
came to this with a lot of things to say, but I think a lot of them have been said. We have a horse business in north central Colorado, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned or discussed yet is how businesses like ours might be compensated if we're displaced by the presence of an endangered species. That is to say, if a family of wolves takes up residence on or near our ranch or the public lands that we're permitted to operate on, that could potentially put us in a position where we have to stop or cease operations. And so I would just ask that this be added to the many considerations and concerns about the budgetary issues that don't seem to be addressed in the current plan. I don't need to take up any more of anybody's time, but that's the one comment that I'd like to be heard.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Adam Van Valkenburg, followed by Bob Twilliger and Mark Cohn. Adam, go ahead.
Hello, I am Adam Van Valkenburg, president of North Park Stock Growers and fourth generation rancher in North Park. I'd like to thank the commission for allowing me to speak today. I too was a part of the group of people that have had the privilege of touring the Blackfoot Challenge, Madison Valley Ranchlands Group, and ranches in Montana through CSU. One of the important lessons was that lethal management must be a tool that is utilized through both government wildlife agents as well as ranchers. If there are wolves that were chronically depredating on cattle, they were removed. A new pack took their place in a matter of days. If that pack left livestock alone, they were left alone. I strongly urge you to consider raising the cap from $8,000 to $15,000 for animals that could potentially be depredated by wolves. Not only do individual producers use these animals above $8,000 value, but part of the livestock industry in Colorado includes seed stock producers and horse breeding operations whose value per animal far exceeds $8,000. We have already seen in Colorado that wolves will not only go after young livestock, but fully grown livestock as well, most often leading to the rancher having to euthanize livestock due to its injuries. I can't stress the importance enough of releasing the wolf under the 10J rule. Management flexibility under the 10J rule is essential for not only well-being of the ranchers and the agriculture industry in Colorado, but wolves as well. Colorado has released endangered species under the 10J rule before, and other wolf reintroductions have carried out under the 10J rule by other states. Why should Colorado be the exception? Finally, I must encourage that you accept documentation from the producer that it is not required to be signed by a veterinarian. The health and well-being of our livestock is our business, and we are with our livestock every day. Our records and documentation should stand with no questions asked. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Bob Twilliger, followed by Mark Cohn and Pamela DeBellis.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Bob, would you like your camera on?
Yes, please.
You may need to hit accept on your end.
Okay. First, thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to talk about the wolf plan. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate the effort of all that have spent time on this over the last couple of years. It's a great piece of work to start. I'm not going to hammer on some of the points that I had in mind that have already been touched on, but maybe just hit on a few highlights. You know, the financials have been called out time and time again. You know, but what I'd like to point out is, you know, not only do we need to come up with the funding for the wolf plan, but there is a piece of work to estimate the revenue loss that we're going to see with declining hunting opportunities, specifically big game license sales, which is big business here in Colorado. That piece of work needs to be done. As I read Proposition 114, it definitely calls that piece of work out as needs to be done. And frankly, CPW's business is dependent on that money today. Phase 4, I strongly support it. I am a big game hunting guide, and this is important to me that you know, hunting is the management tool that we use to manage all wildlife and balance. And once again, I'll call out that Proposition 114 specifically calls out that it's CPW's responsibility to manage wolves and I expect that to be done in balance with all wildlife, not just wolves. The current recovery target, I feel, is a great place to start. Understand it may not satisfy all, but this is going to allow CPW to better assess the impact of wolves while minimizing negative impacts. That's going to be absolutely critical to make sure that the failure and generate lack of trust. And then last but not least, commissioners, I think you guys well understand Colorado's future is in your hands. This initiative passed by the slightest of margins. Its impact in real families on the western slope in potentially devastating way. And we need to look out for them to make sure this gets done the first time. And it also, frankly, could have an impact on everybody's taxes, depending on how the finances this play out. And I bet many that voted didn't understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mark Cohn, followed by Pamela DeBellis and Walt Kramertz on the phone. Mark? Mark, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Mark, we don't have your audio, so why don't you hang tight, and Pamela, why don't we go ahead to you? Pamela DeBellis, followed by Walt Kramertz, and then Maya Key.
Okay.
Yep,
So
go ahead.
Thanks. As a Colorado citizen and advocate for wolves and wildlife, I work to get Proposition 114 passed. While I appreciate the work that's been done to date, I feel several modifications are needed to the current CPW draft plan as follows. Number one, increase the delisting threshold of wolves based on current scientific recommendations. A population of 150-200 wolves in the draft plan will not be adequate to restoring ecological balance throughout Colorado's western slope. This number is actually from a 1994 environmental analysis from the Northern Rockies and is not based on the best, most current scientific data. This population is also not shown to be a self-sustaining population in isolation. So there's no reason to remove protected status from wolves before there is a self-sustaining population, as called for in Proposition 114. The second thing has been mentioned before is removal of a language of a possible phase 4 game status or wolf hunt. Proposition 114 defines wolves as non-game. If wolves are a game species, they would become subject to recreational killing, and this was not what Colorado voters passed and was not a SAG consensus recommendation. This should never happen as part of a reintroduction plan for a species that is struggling to survive. And in fact, most Americans find this type of hunting abhorrent. Proposition 114 is the first step toward a Colorado that could set the standard for wolf restoration and management in the American West. Colorado has been a leader and could be a leader here in preserving our wildlife heritage for all Coloradans and for future generations. I believe we have a moral responsibility to restore a species that we have persecuted and extirpated from its home range. Thank you for considering my view and the view of others who believe that wolves and people can coexist.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Walt Kramertz, followed by Maya Key and Kathy White.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Walt.
Thank you. Very quickly, I'm surprised that Prop 114 passed, and that it did is a tribute to Colorado voters, because there was simply an avalanche of misinformation, stories of woe and despair about devastation of cattle, devastation of the elk and deer, none of which have a scientific basis. But more importantly, I think we need to put this in perspective. How many Colorado cattle are killed each year by weather exposure, where they're simply left out in the blizzard? And what's the compensation for that? And are people running out there shooting at the snow to stop it? And it sounds facetious, but it's a valid point. We're talking about relatively little livestock loss, and the compensation, yes, it absolutely needs to be there, because we have to have a win-win structure and not set people off against each other. There seems to be plenty of money in Washington, plenty of money for certain things, in fact, hundreds of billions or trillions even, for certain things, our Colorado representatives need to secure that money, get it locked in, and be done with this economic argument that gets us all nowhere. Secondly, perspective. 2 human lifetimes ago, think back, that's basically great-grandmom's time or great-granddad's time. This land where we are was a dazzling, dizzying, rich ecosystem full of self-regulating, self-balancing systems that none of us in the room or alive today can even imagine. In terms of the numbers of fish, wildlife, grizzlies, in the space of 2 lifetimes, it has been annihilated. And unfortunately, in large part due to a mindset, you see some of these people at the Wyoming line shooting wolves with grins on their faces. Is that what we support as a people? They look happy to kill. Secondly, cattle are an invasive species on our land, and that needs to be considered. Thank you for your time.
Next, we'll have Maya Key, followed by Kathy White, and whoever's logged in as Casey Jerry, which is, I assume, one of the 2 Jerrys who signed up for this. So Maya, go ahead and unmute. Might have to hit accept. There you go.
Thank you for your time this evening. When we as humans essentially eradicated wolves in this country, we did a great disservice, not only to this beautiful creature, but to the ecosystems that they presided over. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how important an apex predator is to ensuring biodiversity in an ecosystem. They are the engineers of the ecosystem because they can change its dynamic and increase habitat heterogeneity and biodiversity. We need our predators. I'm going to spend the rest of my time just reiterating the many non-lethal ways that should be required by livestock owners with the support of CPW before even considering lethal control. They are numerous and effective, and these methods can and will work if the CPW helps to make them work. First, we'll start with carcasses. According to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, moving bone piles and carcasses from the herd may be the single best action to prevent wolf predation on livestock from happening in the first place. Livestock owners should be required to dispose of all dead animals within a timely manner to prevent this scavenging. Fencing. Livestock producers should be required to confine cows and ewes to fenced or barnyard areas where they can be easily monitored during calving and lambing season when possible, as these are the times when they are most vulnerable to wolves. Permanent or portable fencing can be used, especially at night, to protect flocks or herds. Electric fencing has been seen to be very effective against wolves. The use of fladry on portable electric fencing is even more effective. Fladry is a series of bright cloth flags hung at 18-inch intervals along a rope or fence line. Wolves are reluctant to cross this barrier. Finding electricity with fladry conditions wolves to stay away. Guard dogs and human presence are also very effective at keeping wolves at bay, as wolves tend to stay away from areas where there's a human presence. And finally, practices such as hazing and using scaring devices such as propane cannons, flashing light systems, and loud systems can be particularly effective at preventing wolf predation. All these should be attempted by livestock owners before any lethal control is considered. Will these take a little extra time on the side of livestock owners? With the help of CPW, these are totally manageable practices. Lethal control is not the answer. We need our predators. Please, please.
Next, we'll have our Jerry, whichever one is logged in as Casey Jerry.
Hi, this is Grant Jerry. Thank you for your time. First off, I would like to say we definitely support the wolf management plan as written, particularly establishing a reasonable objective threshold of 250 in that phase 4 management. And as stated previously, will require U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service 10J rule. Particularly of concern is some of those release locations that are centered around areas where elk herds and other ungulates are already suffering, as pointed out earlier in previous areas such as the Roaring Fork Valley. And then that phase 4, it will be absolutely critical to be managed at the state level, and that's written into the plan. Is, as stated earlier, is of greatest some significant concern there, how this is going to be funded. There's no funding sources. And I think this is really the trap we fall into when we try to manage wildlife through ballot initiatives and not through the legislative processes that are already established. That's why we don't have any answers on how these things will be funded or how it'll be appropriated, or how are we going to mitigate those impacts to other species like ungulates. Those are things that are not well thought out when something receives a very slim margin majority like is with this ballot initiative. We talk a lot about social tolerance and trust from sportsmen, but how can we really reasonably think that when we're proposing non-lethal defenses that are methods that aren't effective and are really mostly purely aspirational? Lethal take needs to be a part of that. One thing that hasn't been discussed here is the North American wildlife model. There seems to be some revisionist history there, but the North American model, which was critical to the restoration of many species all across America, hunters were a critical part of that. And many of those restorative species was on the backs and funded by hunters. So I'd say that there's quite a bit of misinformation here when they say most Americans find hunting abhorrent. I don't think that's true in the least. And so we must bring hunters in and along with ranchers and to build trust going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to try to go back to Mark Cohen to see if Mark got his microphone working. After that, we'll have Lori Rugenstein, Sarah Hauser, and Mia Amstein. Mark, you want to try again?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
We can. Go ahead.
Awesome, perfect. Well, thank you all for here to comment on the implementation of wolf reintroduction in Colorado. I've had a pleasure of living in Colorado my entire life, whether that was the Front Range or Park County or my future home of Craig, Colorado. I deeply care about the status of wolves here in our beautiful state, as is important for the food chain, ecosystem equilibrium, and also trophic cascade scenarios. We see the effects of the absence of wolves around Colorado, but my undergrad research concerned the Kawanichi Valley with the absence of tall willows due to elk feeding, which detrimentally affected the wetlands of the valley, as well as fish populations and beavers. The best, least intrusive solution being the reintroduction of wolves. So with that, I'm concerned with a myriad of points in the draft, but I'll limit it to two. The delisting of gray wolves without a geographical element, especially if the limit is only 150 wolves, of which could all be concentrated in a small region without the geographic element, is unacceptable in my eyes. This is not what constituents anticipated after voting in the affirmative for Prop 114, such as myself, and so I think that needs to be addressed immediately. I also find the absence of livestock owners being required to implement coexistence practices in order to be eligible for compensation to be unacceptable as well. Constituents voted to protect this species, and it is an obligation that we do so. Non-lethal management is the best available science, and it should be added immediately to the plan if we were to adhere to Prop 114. So let's not go back to the 20th century, but instead look to the future of Colorado. I appreciate the time of the commissioners as well as the public, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Lori Rugenstein, followed by Sarah Hauser and Mia Amstein. After Mia, we're going to take a break and we'll recheck my list to make sure who we have left. Lori, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate that. The CPW draft plan contains many good points, but some issues need to be addressed to ensure the successful recovery of wolves in Colorado. I appreciate the concern ranchers have about depredation on their livestock. Unfortunately, the draft plan relies too heavily on lethal control rather than providing ranchers with the guidance, training, and resources they need for non-lethal solutions, as Maya discussed. I agree that livestock owners should be compensated for animals lost to wolf depredation, but only if they've first used non-lethal coexistence methods. The numbers of the 4-phase management plan, which involved a change status and level of protection for wolves, are far too low to ensure a self-sustaining wolf population in Colorado. State threatened species status would be removed in phase 3, which would take effect when just 150 wolves are counted 2 years in a row, or 200 wolves in 1 year. Studies have shown that a self-sustaining population requires a minimum of 750 wolves for genetic diversity necessary for that kind of population. When voters approved Prop 114, it specified that wolves would be considered a non-game species. Many people have spoken to this already, meaning they cannot be hunted. Phase 4 is currently stated would allow hunting. This is not acceptable, and this really needs to be changed. It's proof that there is no approval for recreational hunting of wolves. Wolves can be instrumental in promoting biodiversity and ecosystem resilience, but this requires a robust population to reverse the ecological effects caused by their absence for the last 60 years. Thank you again for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Sarah Hauser, followed by Mia Anstine. Sarah, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. A lot of what I'm going to say, I've already heard as well, and that's very encouraging. I think all of this is extremely exciting for our state. So thanks again. Just to get it out of the way, I did vote for Proposition 114, and I am concerned about Phase 4. When I voted for the wolves, I'd never thought that we would reach a point where we would discuss hunting them for game. So that is a concern of mine, and hopefully we can continue those discussions around it and maybe reach a different status for Phase 4, but I appreciate you hearing me there. The other thing I want to point out, which I haven't heard a lot about, is monitoring and observing these wolves and learning from those observations and that research. And I'm hoping that we're going to fund that research fully in our state so that we can become a leader in the research process and hopefully share that with other states in the future. And so that's an area that I'm really interested in. I think there's a lot of fear around wolves, and I'd like to squash some of those fears through research and through education. And I do firmly believe that getting this public acceptance will, be fueled through our research. So thank you for your time tonight, and take care.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mia Anstine, after which we'll take a break, and then we'll come back for the conclusion of public comment. Again, for people who are an attendee but not logged in under your actual name, for instance, Maria, if you could maybe email me during the break about who you are so I know who I'm calling on. Mia, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I would appreciate that you would at least respectfully consider my comments this evening. My name is Mia Anstine, and I am from Ignacio, Colorado. I'm a volunteer in the state for SCI, which is a conservation organization. And I too attended the Blackfoot Challenge with CSU and fellow producers. I learned there that the wolves will not only eat my calves, but they're going to eat their bones, hooves, and the entirety. We all know that compensation is a huge issue and funding is another, an issue that has never been agreed upon and is very much contentious by the looks on a lot of your faces. That's of management. I want to tell you a story about wolves on an island in Southeast Alaska. They've killed all the black-tailed deer there on that island, and now they feast on sea otters. This microhabitat exemplifies why the North American model of wildlife conservation is so important. I know people don't like to hear that word, but it is true conservation. And because of that, we have species that thrive and are not thrown into imbalance and suffering. Management does not lead to extinction, but instead it is statistically proven to bring back numbers of populations of wild animals. My family and generations before me have been practicing the wise use of resources for many years. The North American model of conservation has 7 pillars. Please look up those pillars. It ensures that we all have opportunity, no matter where we come from. We have the opportunity to pursue wild game. I know wolves will not be able to be pursued initially, but it also has a pillar that emphasizes a need to manage via science, not emotion. We must manage all wild animals. Please stop any emotional pandering. Start planning to manage wolves. It must be considered as they pursue our livestock. It is one of the only means we learned about in a means to protect our animals. And after they've reached a large number, as Reed said at the beginning of the meeting, we'll have success, and we need management. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, thank you. Madam Chair, I have 6:51 on my clock. Do you want to come back at 7 or shortly thereafter?
Well, I'm guessing that the commission and everybody else would like to be done earlier than go longer. So if everyone can take a 10-minute break and be back at 7, a quick break, that would be great. We'll see you at 7. Okay, I think we're back in session. It is 7 o'clock on. I'm gonna take that personally, Dion. Good evening, everyone. Again, we have reconvened the Thursday, February 16th special meeting of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. This is largely to receive public comment in a virtual format on the draft wolf restoration and management plan. So we have the balance of, I think Katie says we have another 8 people that are on deck to offer comment. Then we will have some time for commissioner questions and comments, and then we will adjourn. And then our next opportunity to be together will be on February 22nd in Adams County at the Adams County Fairground. I do know that Executive Director Gibbs has now joined us, so just want to acknowledge him for the evening, and then turn it back over to Katie Lanter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next up, we'll have Allison Dahlman, followed by Courtney Vale and Ginny Harrington. Allison, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Dr. Allison Dahlman, veterinarian. Perez Pereira et al. 2022 Best Science directs a minimum of 100 breeding pairs, population 1,000, to avoid genetic drift, to face environmental changes and persist. CPW's draft removes protections at only 150 to 200, clearly not best science, as used by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the 3 R's, representation, redundancy, and resiliency. Prop 114 directs wolves recover to self-sustaining population, but without sufficient numbers and distribution in diverse habitats, it won't happen. Wolves evolved to depend on family structure, stability year to year, but if lethal control and hunting are permitted, stability will be destroyed, preventing their performing ecological functions, including predating ungulates much larger than they and raising young. Just one loss can significantly alter family dynamics, as Cassidy et al. 2023 noted, researching decades of data, concluding human-caused mortality of any wolf, decreased odds of pack persistence through the biological year 27%, and reproduction the next year 22%. If a pack leader is killed, persistence decreased 73% and reproduction 49%. As a vet, I've witnessed animals suffer. Their sensitivity, compassion, personalities. Just as humans don't understand wolf speak and non-verbal forms of communication does not mean they don't do and feel it. Their cortisol, heart, respiration, blood pressure all increase under duress. But do you really need a monitor to know that if your son or spouse is killed, you and your kids will suffer? Protecting wolves helps stabilize their families, benefits ecosystems, advances non-lethal management, aiding all species, and exhibits societal growth to step away from short-sighted killing of our keystone apex icon who thinks, feels, and loves family as we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Courtney Vale, followed by Jenny Harrington and David Hand.
Thank
Courtney,
you to
go
the
ahead.
Okay, thank you to the Commission for this opportunity. I'm Courtney Vale. As an advisor to the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, I am a wildlife biologist and a wolf advocate, but I'm also a supporter of Western Slope livelihoods. I co-own a small ranch in southwestern Colorado where cattle graze on our property part of the year. I share these details only to suggest we are all multidimensional human beings, and that being pro-wolf does not equate with being anti-rancher, anti-hunter, or any other assumptions associated with these labels. I want to focus attention on the stories that we tell each other and the influence they have in defining the hard work ahead of us. Personal stories coming from North Park have been powerful and overwhelmingly negative. Understandably, having been among the first to experience wolves in Colorado, Mr. Gittleson's story has garnered lots of attention, but there are good stories deserving of attention too. For instance, I am just one of many, many other wolf advocates who traveled to Walden on more than one occasion to listen to producers and lend a hand, including pounding posts for flattery installation. We have donated equipment and pledged funding to CPW to assist with field efforts. And we worked with ranchers Joe and Jim Stanko to host an event at their ranch in Steamboat, bringing wolf advocates and producers together for a weekend of learning. 5 ranching families opened their homes and their operations to us to find ways to work together and foster tolerance and respect. We are also working to raise revenue to support long-term conflict prevention. Colorado State University has created the Wolf Conflict Reduction Fund for the sole purpose of implementing on-the-ground tools and initiatives to assist producers. These are just a few examples of positive conflict minimization programs that should be fully articulated under Chapter 6 of the draft plan. Conflict prevention is required by statute and should be supported by separate funding, at least equal to that envisioned for compensation. When depredations occur, no one benefits, and certainly not wolves. There are many of us in this state who are willing to work together. So let's start talking about the good stories too. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Jenny Harrington, followed by David Hand and Bill Wilson. Jenny, go ahead.
Hi, this is Jenny Harrington. I'm a ranch girl, a 5th generation Colorado native. My husband and I have cattle of our own, and he manages the ranch in the Carbondale area. And I serve as the membership chairman for Holy Cross Cattlemen's Association. I wanted to throw out some statistics that American Farmlands Trust Farm Under Threats have reported in the July 18th, 2022 article. It stated, if recent trends continue, 417,500 acres of Colorado's farmland and ranch land will be paved over, fragmented, or converted to uses that jeopardize agriculture by 2040. These are things that are impacted when we have challenges such as water and drought and fires and predators and different things that make it hard to operate. So I just want folks to consider that we work hard to make this situation as easy as we can to be able to keep the ranchers in business and keep those great things, those ecosystem services like open space and wildlife habitat available. Anyways, I wanted to talk about the impacts on livestock owners and private landowners. We need to be really careful that we accurately assess the impacts on an increasing wolf population and what occurs as we move forward through this. Land use, this could be interpreted as land use restriction if we cannot graze certain areas due to dinning, wolves, cattle bunching due to wolf pressure and not using the resources available. So I want to make sure that we consider to make sure we have all the options available, including lethal take, to be able to manage our cattle, because indeed we do provide for the wildlife. An example, just 2 days ago, we had over 200 head of elk here and the pasture with the first calf heifers. And so we do take care of wildlife, and the wolves are going to be where the elk are. So please consider, and I thank you guys for all the hard work that has been done in this process, and consider lethal take and all those mitigation methods. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have David Hand, followed by Bill Wilson and Rhonda Dern. All right, I thought I'd seen David, just a moment. All right, folks, just give a moment. Seems like we lost a few that were in there.
That's good.
David, do we have you back?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, David.
Okay. I just want to say, first, stage 4 needs to be thrown out. We did vote wolves as non-game, and hunters aren't paying for wolf reintroductions, and trophy hunting wolves will not be tolerated. I do keep hearing that CPW needs more personnel to be hired. I agree with that, but they need a lot more law enforcement too. On CPW's last Facebook post about wolves, poachers were bragging about shooting them. One commenter on the last meeting in Rifle said the same. That shows they really don't have any fear or respect for CPW law enforcement. We might want to look into getting some federal wardens from U.S. Fish and Wildlife brought in. And education and facts on wolves are basically non-existent in some of these Western Slope areas that I've listened to. I like the idea of more education about wolves, but I don't think a QAnon mindset is ever going to be changed. And we do need stronger law enforcement. And also we need to focus more on the positives of what wolves can bring. And also for funding, I would look into some kind of endowment where you can raise private donations. Thanks. That's all I got.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Bill Wilson, followed by Rhonda Dern and Rainer Gerbach. Bill, go ahead.
Hi, Katie. Can I go ahead and start?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commission members. I truly appreciate all your volunteer time you put into this. I spoke in Rifle, but I was so doggone nervous. I'm not sure I got my point across. So I wrote down a few notes. If you don't mind, I'll read. Again, my name is Bill Wilson. I've been involved in agriculture most of my adult life. We have our own outfitting business, a family-run business, and we've done that for 20 years. And I also have an associate degree in wildlife management. I'm asking this evening for you to support Phase 4 of CPW's wolf introduction plan. Colorado wildlife is the result of the North American model. I've heard at all the meetings I've attended how we have the best wildlife managers in the state, in the world, and I agree with that. I'm asking you to let our professional wildlife managers use Phase 4 and include the wolf in the North American model. I'm afraid, trade papers here, I'm afraid if the wolf population is left unchecked, that it'll be catastrophic on all other wildlife. Most states that control wolf populations have traps, snares, rifles, and Idaho uses about anything but airplanes. And they still have a hard time managing wolves. We will just have the use of a rifle because all other means to control them have already been outlawed. I think the wolf will be almost impossible to control in Colorado. They will be here, even their numbers will be unchecked, I believe, even if Phase 4 is implemented. I think with the amount of wildlife that they have to eat, that they're going to do well. And when we reach 200 wolves, I think that number is just going to keep on going, whether we try to control them or not. I hope I'm wrong. Again, I hope you do include Phase 4. Thank you for your time, and folks, have a good evening.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Rhonda Dern, followed by Rainer Gerbach and Karine Mahuna. If there are any other attendees after Karine who expected to speak tonight and we haven't heard from, if you could send me an email, I would appreciate it. Otherwise, Karine will be our last speaker. So Rhonda, go ahead.
The 1860s North American model of wildlife conservation, NAM, that CPW relies on to create a wolf plan is outdated and is not best science. The law states gray wolf means non-game wildlife of the species Canis lupus. Phase 4 in the CPW plan defies state law by allowing hunting of wolves. Current best science exposes the failures in the NAM. Instead of protecting wolves as intrinsic beings with the right to reside safely with their families, in the NAM, wolves are exposed to human aggression violence, injury, and death. The NAM's support for sportsmen's hunting and trapping of wolves conceals gross cruelty and violations of wolves' right to live unharmed by humans. It's not sport to kill wolves. The compassionate conservation model must replace NAM. The model aligns with current science and emphasizes that individual animals are not objects or commodities. It employs full coexistence strategies and healthy wolf family structure for their survival. CPW says it will come down to social tolerance to determine how wolves will do in Colorado. I have seen at the SAG meetings how there's been a collective effort to push out disinformation to decrease social tolerance of wolves. This is done through statements greatly exaggerating the statistics on the number of livestock depredations and claiming falsely that wolves will decimate ungulate herds, denying the science that says they won't. There's never been a SAG meeting that is focused on the intrinsic and ecological value of wolves in efforts to increase social tolerance of them. Seems to me you don't have the science to back up lethal control or hunting of wolves, so you're relying on negative myths to decrease social tolerance. It is this false information that stirs up the emotional reaction of disgust, anger, and outrage in response to injustice that motivates us to speak for wolves. Colorado will benefit from wolves gracing our soil. Let them be.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Rainer Gerbach, followed by Kareen Mahuna. Rainer, go ahead.
Got the video going. Good evening. Proposition 114 gave CPW a simple mandate: restore the balance in nature and rely on best available science. So what have we learned since the release of the draft plan? Livestock producers, hunters, and outfitters hard at work. Gloom and doom as soon as the first paw hits the ground. The Little Red Riding Hood is alive. Depletion of game herds. Livestock producers and hunters as guardians of ecosystems. These claims have been soundly rejected by scientific evidence time over. I'd like to share a quote from Ed Abbey in Cowburned. The ranger, with honorable exceptions, is a man who strings barbed wire all over the range, drills wells, bulldozes stock ponds, drives up elk and antelope and bighorn sheep, poisons coyotes and prairie dogs, shoots eagles, bears, cougars on sight, supplants native grasses with invasive species, cow shit, ant hills, mud, dust, and flies. Then he leans back and grins at the TV cameras and talks about how much he loves the American West. Politics and Wildlife Agency has created a pathological economy where every part of nature is objectified, unfettered exploitation. Ranching interests resulted in the near extermination of wolves, removal of other predators, and uncontrolled degradation of public lands. Hunters, outfitters demanded management of nature for huntable game and removal of unwanted wildlife. The path continues: mindless, uninformed destruction of biodiversity, destruction funded by taxpayers, with a frightening neglect of the ecological role of predators. NAM is not working for nature. It's not working for us. America needs to change its violent, unhinged, and uninformed relationship. Priceless. Yet myopic wildlife management created a political lightning rod. The draft plan fails all stakeholders: wolves, the public, and livestock producers. For all-around success, the plan must be based on the evidence presented by the public, the entire peer-reviewed scientific literature. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Kareen Mahuna.
Yeah, hello. Proposition 114 tasked CPW with developing a plan that is a win-win for both wolves and Coloradans using the best available science. Despite numerous submissions to CPW by Norm Bishop and others of the research from leading wolf experts, the plan falls far short of being based on best available science and seems to instead have been hijacked in favor of so-called social tolerance. Livestock operators who have modernized their husbandry and use conflict minimization strategies have found that after an initial investment of time and money, their operations are more resilient and profitable. Isn't this how all successful businesses operate? Those hunters who are truly in touch with nature appreciate wolves for the keystone species that they are. There are more elk in the Northern Rockies now than before wolf reintroduction. In localized places where herd numbers are down, such as the Lolo herd in Idaho, wolves were not a major factor in their decline. Elk herds were never large historically in the Lolo area due to the thick overstory and the lack of adequate forage. Fires in the early 1900s opened up the area to better forage, and elk numbers exploded, but were already drastically declining by the time the wolves were reintroduced as the forest once more encroached and forage was lost. It is past time to stop blaming the wolves. Wolves are far more beneficial to other wildlife and wilderness than harmful, which is why they are considered a keystone species. If social tolerance is to be factored into a wolf restoration plan, then it must be based on an informed public that understands and accepts the best available science. A sound wolf plan means no public hunting, ecologically functional populations over a wide geographical area, and use of conflict minimization techniques, which are not only more effective than lethal control, but which promote the development of more resilient and successful livestock operations. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, that concludes the public comment that we have this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to members of the public for joining us this evening. So I think our balance of our time tonight is commissioner comments and questions. Again, this is generally an open forum. We have the benefit of our staff and legal counsel and others available to respond, read if there were any dangling items from last time. I want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to address those. So maybe I'll turn that to you first and see if there were anything that you wanted to clear up from last time. And I see Eric's on camera as well.
Thank you,
And
Chair
Jake.
Hauser. Right now, we don't have any items from the rifle meeting that were still on our list that we need to discuss. I think we did an effective job at the last meeting getting to those. So possibly talk about new things that we need to discuss for the 22nd, or leave it to the commissioners.
Okay, and just so that there's not confusion, there are items coming back to us on the 22nd that we discussed in rifle in terms of some of the language suggestions and a few other things, if I'm not mistaken. So we will see those at that time.
Yes, that's correct. We're providing 2 documents that have answers to the questions, one from Eric and I on more the management side of things, and then one from Corey and Luke and Matt on the depredation and compensation side. So, and then we have also done some rewording of the document at some of the requests from Rifle last week.
Great. So we will have an opportunity to go through all those things that I think we gave some consensus guidance to the team to bring back to us. So I'll open it up for questions, comments from members of the commission. Commissioner Bailey.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks all for the public comment. I tell my students all the time about how important it is. So thanks all who showed up. I just wanted to, one thing that struck me today, and that has been on my mind a little bit in the past as well, is a need for some understanding around some of the planned proposed ideal research that CPW would like to conduct, and potential partnerships, for instance, with CSU that might make sense to support the research and ensure that CPW doesn't have all of it. So any sort of updates, again, I'm not really clear on, I don't have a suggestion for the best timing for such a planned research update, but I think it would just be nice to hear.
Hey, Eric Reed, sort of taking that under advisement. And I'm just saying only for sequencing, not sure whether that is during this process, following this process. So if it can be in a parking lot, just to make sure we don't lose it. I'm seeing nods from Commissioner Bailey. So, okay. Commissioner Haskett and then Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple thoughts or questions. Something that I don't believe is in here is if CPW and Wildlife Services are unable to keep up with wolf conflicts, do we have a backup plan on what we're going to do if that happens? And then the next one is, you've heard a lot of people say that wolves will help with CWD, but my understanding is there's no research to support that it doesn't show one way or the other. are we going to start research on that to try to prove that it does work or it doesn't work? And when would that happen?
My apologies, it's a little awkward just being virtual to see who's going to answer for you.
Just jump in.
Yeah, I see the Grand Junction Conference Room has a lot of the Luke and Matt and Corey are in that room. Do you guys want to talk about the first question about I don't know if you heard all that or if you guys want to cover that one.
Thanks, commissioners. Great question, Commissioner Haskett. I mean, of course, up front say that, I mean, we're a pretty proud agency and hopefully would not fall short of our job. That being said, I mean, we're continually right now having discussions at the LT level, what the future looks like. We're also sitting here in Grand Junction for a reason. We just had a meeting with Fish and Wildlife Service and Wildlife Service and are having a lot of those conversations that I think would address your question and how we move forward into the future to make sure that doesn't happen. I know I didn't give you a ABC or a plan B on what we would exactly do, but we're working towards that as we speak.
Okay, thank you.
So I might merge Commissioners Haskett and Bailey's questions maybe into one, because that would seem to be part of that research and understanding as we go along. Which I'm hearing is standard practice. So we can assume that would come back to us at some point, or perhaps future commissions.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. One thing that we do have right now is prevalence rates for CWD in all our herds, which is very helpful. So we have that information, and once wolves establish themselves here, we'll be ready to study that as well. But I think that, like you said, Chair Hauser, will bring that as a research update at a future time.
Okay, great. Commissioner Touchton.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first, I guess I have some thoughts about what we were just talking about, but let me get to my suggestion first, which is my general sense is, that people are starting to stress out quite a bit, including us, about having a perfect plan, everything nailed down and exactly the way they want. And, that stress is relieved if the plan is flexible and you have a opportunity to revise it after you see how it's working. So I think one thing that might allay the fears of everyone is if we established, an opportunity for revision of the plan sooner rather than later. And I was going to suggest a time frame of about 3 years. That should be after the initial round of releases, the 30 to 50 wolves. It'll probably take us about 3 years to get those out there. And then, you've got an opportunity to see what's working, see what's not. But, I'm open to suggestions on the time frame. I don't really care about some magic time frame, but I do think that if we have a formal, not just a report, to the commission or to the legislature, but an opportunity to revise the plan relatively soon, it takes some of the pressure off. Then on the thing we were just talking about, again, well, I want to echo what Corey just said, which I think there's a high degree of trust for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I would be very leery about working too closely with Wildlife Services. Everyone's trapped in their own experience. My own experience with Wildlife Services as an environmental advocate is they're among the most law-breaking federal agencies that exist. And I think sooner or later, they'll make us look bad. I know in New Mexico, Wildlife Services just made that wolf program look corrupt. And so, I would really emphasize the need to keep lethal control in-house and not rely on outside services that, again, I think will eventually make us look bad. So anyway, that's just my own views on that. I know other people might have had great experiences with Wildlife Services. Those just have not been mine.
Okay, thank you. I might piggyback on that. Maybe it's cart before the horse a little bit, but I would again remind us as well to reflect upon what's come to us from the SAG and the TWIG. And it, in my view, is exactly what Commissioner Touchton just described. And that is a plan and a framework that provides flexibility and the opportunity to come back. Even phase 4, as it is written, builds in that flexibility. And I would encourage everyone to read it exactly as it's worded, because it is full of potentially may. It has the opportunity for that flexibility. And it does not prohibit coming back and looking at, kind of what we know when we know it several years from now. And it doesn't even become a consideration until phase 3. So again, just as a sort of a reminder to all of us that, my sense of it is that what we're looking at is a plan worded, as Commissioner Touchton mentions, and it provides some of that flexibility. And whether we want to put in some of those bumpers, whatever those timeframes are, I certainly think that's appropriate in our final deliberations. Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very well said, and I agree. I would caution of actually looking at the whole plan in 3 years, as we've done with many things, CWD or big game season structure. It takes several years to figure out how things are actually working. And I think 3 years is too soon. I would say a minimum of 5 years, but I do believe we have flexibility in this. I think that the regs are going to also, that's where more items are going to come up, but I do believe we have some flexibility in this, and SAG and TWIG did a good job of giving us a general framework. And the one thing we heard in Rifle, I believe, is that all of them said, please leave this as what we came up with. We all had compromises, every one of them. And I think we should honor that. They put in 18 months of time, and it was a hard experience. We tasked that to them, and they came up with something that I think is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner May, and then Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not having my video up. I'm struggling with the signal. So I just wanted to add this thought. As we talk about adding additional staff for the process that's going, I wondered if we might consider, as we're talking professionals, we might try to think of modeling something after the Marine Evidence Recovery team. And what I'm talking about is a forensics type team that could be rapid response if there was something that happened, and we have the onus off of our staff, AWMs, regional managers, but bring in some so-called experts that were expert forensics that could help with some of the proof or evidence of whenever we had some depredations. And I just wanted to throw that out there, that maybe that's something we could look into that would help us a lot with both the livestock and pro advocates. That would give a big area of trust that investigate something. It wasn't just somebody that didn't have time to do it, but would be a team of specialists that could bring that to a head. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner May. I don't know if the team wants to respond to that or just
Chair Hauser,
take that under. Okay, go ahead.
I can respond to it because
Okay.
it's.
Go ahead, Corey.
I think part of it exists, and I would call that our area offices. We have 18 throughout the state that to be honest, are experts. A lot of them, if not most, at forensics, as it deals with wildlife. That being said, we can be better, and that's what we're attempting to do. I think I've spoke about it a little bit, but we're looking at adding what we would call damage specialists throughout the state, hopefully here in the near future, to be able to hopefully lead those those teams and investigations as well. So I guess the short version is we're on it, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. To the Grand Junction
That's
conference room.
Dallas. And
Go ahead, go ahead, Dallas.
There. Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you guys have a plan for that, but what I was wondering was if there could be, and the reason I use the Marine Evidence Recovery Team is that they respond to all areas of, and if there was a situation where local staff maybe needed some help, we could call that would really specialize in what we're doing. And I know that your on hand does that. I'm just talking about maybe some redundancy in that.
Point taken. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Dallas. You're a little choppy. So I think we all caught what you, the sentiments, but you are still a little choppy. Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to echo or share my opinion around some of the things that have been shared already. One, I wanted to actually, Commissioner Bailey, I was similarly thinking about the research component, and that I would agree that, and Commissioner Haskett as well, that it should be, I'm excited to see more reflection in the plan around that proactively, because data would be being collected or used right now, or rather during their introduction. So just wanted to echo my support for that section being deepened and expanded. In addition, I also support the revisions. I agree with Commissioner Haskett that 5 years is probably a better, it also aligns with a lot of other plans that we have. I also wanted to just, clarify that it was my understanding that that the commission has the capacity to revise the plan at any time. I mean, at least annually, from the previous conversations that we had about compensation, where we said a few meetings ago that it was 8,000, but we did clarify several times with Luke that that number could be changed. So it was my understanding that if we could change that there are other elements that we can change based on the lived experience of what happens when wolves are on the ground. So again, whether it be 3 years, 5 years, just want to remind folks that there's opportunities to change the plan as needed. There's no prohibition for us updating the plan as needed. And the plan is just a bumper card. We haven't tried to do anything like this in the conditions and the population size that we have here. So I appreciate the flexibility, and I echo Chairwoman Hauser's confidence about the STAG and TWIG contributions. As for phase 4, again, I don't want to plan with a whole bunch of may, maybe, should, has. I want to plan. And so if it doesn't get triggered until 3, then, I per the conversation that we had in Rifle, I really appreciated Commissioner Bailey's recommendation of just some alternate wording that doesn't make it seem like it's in sequence as a part of our plan, but a possibility of something that can happen based on different triggers and thresholds that needs to be answered by the next commission at that time with the information that they will have from these research studies. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you again to the staff for this incredible work, and thank you, public, for sharing your comments, being actively engaged. This is one of numerous, high stakes, urgent and important issues that this agency will be facing in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Redding.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to everyone who testified at all the hearings over the past few months. And I think it's been very interesting and enlightening to all of us. So thank you. And thank you to the staff of CPW for their hard work as well, and the rest of the commissioners. I just want to echo what Commissioner Adams just said, that I concur that I don't want a lot of mays and shoulds either. I think it makes sense in this case. I don't always agree that we should kick the can down the road, but in this case, I think we should. I think that the language seems relatively clear in the law that now exists that they're non-game. Whether or not we change that, I think, is something we can consider. But I think we consider that when we have data and information, and that's down the road at the 5-year plan. And I think that's a great time to do it. 5 years down the road is perfect for me. So thank you.
Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just to finish that conversation, 5 years is fine with me. I think I threw out 3. I think it's the concept, not the exact year. So if 5 years works better, that's great. I wanted to go back to a couple points. One, I think Commissioner Bailey brought it up at our last meeting, but it was that maybe the appropriate point to look at a population viability analysis, or what a self-sustaining population means, is at that point where we go from threatened to non-game. And so that's something I'd like to see if staff thinks that makes sense at that point. We have our numeric targets, 150 or 200. But when I think the real determinant of whether we've succeeded in implementing 114 is if we have a self-sustaining population, and maybe the way you prove that is with a population viability analysis. So I'd like to see that, considered at some point. And then finally, to downlist from threatened to non-game, some commenters said this evening, I do think we need to look at geography and a geographic component to that level of recovery. And, it cuts both ways. It makes sure that the wolves aren't all on one part of the state, which I think some people would appreciate if the wolves were either enjoyed or causing problems all over the place, whichever side of that fence you're on. So I'd like us to look at adding a geographic component to removing the threatened protection and going to non-game.
Here, Hauser, I can address a couple of those.
Okay, go ahead, Eric. And just as a reminder, we'll do the best we can. We've got lots of individual interests that have been suggested, and we're going to have to try to get to some level of consensus at some point. So we all have our individual, and we have to always think about our sort of stakeholders and the public as well. So just as it goes in the sausage making, just know that you might put it out there and it may go one place or the other, and it'll come back to us for some sort of, are we going to go this direction? Are we going to go this direction? So just in terms of process, we haven't lost anything. Go ahead, Eric.
Thanks. And for the record, Eric Odell, Species Conservation Program Manager with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I'll address a few of the questions that have been made, some by Commissioner Touchton and some by others as well. First, on the research side of things, we have already hired a researcher. Dr. Ellen Brandel has been recently hired and brought on to staff, and is in the process of doing some work in North Park right now, and working in other parts, setting up some research programs and projects in other parts of the state. So we're very fortunate to have her and her skills on staff. There's a whole bunch of different kind of research priorities. In fact, you heard from her in the December 9th meeting when we presented the plan at first too. So there is, in the research program, will be evolving through time as well. On the timeline side of things, I'm really pleased to hear not sticking strongly to a 3-year time frame. We've been at this for just over 2 years now, and here we are. So if we were on a 3-year timeline, we'd be starting right back up. So I think that a time frame when we're done with reintroductions and have something to think about and have some data and some information to reflect on, and that might provide some justification for a revised plan, does make good sense. There are reporting requirements through this plan, and there will be an annual report that talks about a whole variety of the status of the reintroduction, the status of wolves on the ground, and different things like that. So it's not as though you, the commission and the legislature and the public and others will hear regularly from CPW on the status of wolf restoration, wolf reintroduction. Commissioner Touchton, you had made another point about the timing to do a PVA, a population viability analysis. When is the most appropriate and not necessarily only appropriate, but also informative time to do that? And I think you're right. right now, for us to do a PVA would be to use peer-reviewed published parameters to model what the population status is, very similar to what Oregon did. The way Oregon did their PVA that I've talked about at previous meetings was at the time that they were ready to consider delisting the population of wolves in their state, was they conducted a PVA using data that were specific to to Oregon, which is kind of, I think, what you're suggesting, us conducting a PVA at the time that we're delisting, using the data that our monitoring and our research both will have collected it over the subsequent years. I think that's very appropriate. I think that's a really good time frame to do that and to think about that. The geography question is a good one, and there's lots of ways to think about it. We've said before, with kind of rough back of the envelope calculations, at a population of 200, we anticipate about 2.8 million acres of wolf habitat. Certainly that's not all of the wolf habitat in Colorado, and there's not, wolves are territorial, will defend those territories and will spread themselves out. There's risk in putting different kinds of recovery criteria that puts the burden on different parts of the state as well. And so I think that it's important to be thoughtful as to what the implications might be if there are, if wolves are doing fairly well, very well in some part of the state, but not in others, and there's a geographic criteria, what that might mean for the parts of the state where wolves are doing well, but not able to delist the wolves throughout the state. So just different kinds of things to think about. So I'll stop there and let the conversation continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Other questions, comments? Commissioner Haskett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's easier than trying to figure out how to raise my hand. Eric, I guess I do have a question. I don't think geographically we can put anything because they're going to go wherever they want to go. But that does bring the question of, so if they move to the Front Range and there's a community that they take up residence, are they going to be allowed to persist there if the community what's the social tolerance, I guess? There could be communities that are very unhappy and worried. What are we going to do there?
The plan does not put any, thank you, Commissioner Haskett. The plan does not put any geographic restrictions on where wolves will be. We're required by statute to release them. The reintroduction sites will be all west of the Continental Divide, as we've talked about before. But wolves will go all over the state, and we fully expect them to be east of the Continental Divide, west of the Continental Divide. And in fact, the wolves in North Park are in fact east of the Continental Divide. All of those wolves count towards recovery, and all of those wolves there's not going to be an effort to try to restrict wolf presence or distribution only west of the Continental Divide.
Okay, I haven't heard from a few of you. I could just start calling on you. You know who you are. To please weigh in. Commissioner Phillips and then Commissioner Otero. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hauser. Yeah, good, big thanks to the staff again. I really don't have anything. It's all the same kind of stuff. I'm really looking forward to hearing back on some of the stuff from Rifle that we've been going over. And I did appreciate your comments on the phase 4 and the built-in flexibility that adds. It really, it just sets the stage for potential to manage in my book. And I think you said that really well. So thank you.
Thank you. And I probably should have said the entire plan has flexibility in it. It's not just that portion, because we are doing the best we can, as did the SAG and the TWIG, to deliver us something that was definitive enough and had some opportunity to adapt and be flexible. So it wasn't just that section. I didn't mean to just throw that out there. And at the same time, it's getting a lot of attention. And if you read it, there are some bumpers around it and some real flexibility in it. So, and we'll come back to what we're going to see in February, next week, at our next meeting, and some of the suggested edits that we should see. Commissioner Otero.
Thank you, Chair Hauser. Yeah, I just really want to thank the public for taking time to comment. All of your comments are definitely appreciated, and also support and echo what has been lifted up of revising, updating the plan in 5 years. I think that's a really good approach, and look forward to, more clarification in the meeting next week from what we raised in Rifle.
Okay, I see a few that still haven't said anything, so I could either call on you or Commissioner Blackhat. Look at that. Nice job. Right on time.
Yeah, do I take it down? Oh, I do take it down. I don't have any direct questions right now. I'm just a couple things I'm waiting to hear about next week. So thank you.
Okay. Anyone else on the commission? Before we just sort of close, I do want to offer the opportunity for Executive Director Gibbs and Acting Director Dugan to say anything that they might like to. And I also have somewhere in the amazing technological ether, our counselor Matter has indicated that he'd like to say a few words as well. So why don't we start with you, Jake, before we go to Dan or Heather? Thanks.
Yeah, I was just taking notes on a handful of things, and on the 3 to 5 year sort of review of the plan, does the plan as currently written contemplate a specific year when the staff would review it? I mean, Proposition 114 says you need to periodically receive public input on the plan. Eric referred to the various reports that are necessary. But at the same time, Eric, you seemed, to agree with his suggestion that 5 years sounds appropriate for a look back, combined with the reporting obligations and sort of assuming that the additional public input and updates on the plan would be also occurring. Is that something you're comfortable with? I just want to flesh out, if there are things that the commission and the staff really agree on, I think it makes February 22nd easier. And if the 5 year look back makes sense to add, maybe that's something that we can sort of clarify now rather than on the 22nd.
Yeah, the time frame for revision is something that we look to the commission for guidance for. With the plan as written, as was presented, it does not describe a time frame for that to happen. We're going to be in a busy 3 to 5 years with the act of the reintroduction. I would suggest that it might make sense to wait until after the reintroduction is complete, and then that starts the time frame. Once the population is the ongoing hands-on management year to year in terms of reintroduction is over, that might be a good time to start the clock to think about when the revision might be due. So 5 years from that point in time, something like that is something I might suggest. But it's, we look to direction from the commission as to what that ought to be in the plan itself. But that does seem like a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, and I agree. Commissioner Adams earlier said this is sort of a living, breathing document, and it's going to be subject to review from time to time. 2 years from now, the commission could say, please give us an update on X. What are you hearing? What do the annual reports say? So is it important to the commission to have some sort of dedicated 3 to 5 year benchmark currently, or recognizing that you retain that flexibility into the future? That isn't a critical revision.
Okay. I think that was a statement, Jake. Right.
Okay.
Were you, I don't know if you were looking for a response.
Does the commission want to amend the plan to say in 5 years, we want the division to do X?
I'll just throw it out there. I think I agree with Commissioner Adams where we need to be adaptable. The ballot measure says best available science. If there's a time we need to check in after the first year, after the second year, we should be able to, right? Like, I don't know if we need to have a hard and stop 5 year. But I guess I yield to Eric and Reed on their advice too. But if something dramatically changes, we should be able to touch base anytime, of course.
if I might, Chair Hauser.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Appreciate that in the flexibility. And I think that it is important to maintain the flexibility that the plan currently has. And so, you know, a revision of the plan to me is something different than being adaptive in the way that practices are being implemented. So I think it's important to understand that the difference is there and that we do retain and do have a lot of different avenues to go for a variety of different aspects, especially for the reintroduction logistics, that it's very valuable to have that flexibility, and a revision to the plan would just take up a lot of time to do that. And if we can keep that flexibility in there rather and discuss that, of course, and have ways to revisit the monitoring and the work that's being done and change paths if necessary, that's very important. To require a plan revision is not a trivial task either. And so it's important to have that ability to be agile.
So I'm hearing, just maybe as a summary, again, the plan provides for the flexibility. We have to have enough data to be able to have any information for, you know, any kind of adaptation. 2 or 3 years is probably not enough. 5 years might be that right window. And the plan provides for enough flexibility for the determination of when that would occur. I'm seeing you nod, Eric. Okay. And I'm seeing Commissioner Bailey, who brought this up, nod. Commissioner Bailey.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was just processing what you just said.
Okay. I saw your hand up too. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that maybe aligns with my thinking. I think I think we need both. And I think, you know, to Eric's point, one doesn't preclude the other. I think for the public, for knowing when things will be changed, for the legislator, knowing when things will be changed for the future commissions and for CPW staff, having a clear timeline is helpful, the same way we do with like the big game season structure or herd management plans, right? It's helpful to know what's coming. So I'm certainly not opposed to saying, you know, we'll aim for 5 years. And then in addition to that, right, I think anything that, you know, might threaten the success of the plan certainly, you know, requires immediate action. And that's why we have, right, emergency rulemaking, for example. So I see both in there, and I don't know that one precludes the other.
And the wording might be no longer than, or something like that, rather than on the front end, it might be a no longer than some window that we can live with. And I sort of look to the staff to help us with that and maybe make a suggestion. Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to second what Commissioner Bailey just said. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think there's and as Director Gibbs said, there can be a continuous feedback loop, but I think we should put a marker out there for when the plan would at least be thought about revising. I hear Eric saying actually revising it is a big deal, but just an opportunity to have the commission think about revising it. And I liked Eric's suggestion of starting the 5-year clock when after the initial round of releases. So we plan to release 30 to 50 wolves. When we're done with that, we start a 5-year clock on how our plan is doing. And then we at least formally think about revising it at the end of that 5 years. And, you know, I know it's a lot of work, but I mean, it's important to a lot of people in the state, you know, well, I bet we'll get a lot more comments than on a herd management plan or some of the other documents that we're revising. So anyway, I think it's worth putting a formal marker in the plan about when it will be revised, because it lets people know that this is not forever. And if they get it wrong now, they've got a formal opportunity to change it in the future.
Okay, so we don't have green, yellow, red. So I'm just going to say, if you generally agree with sort of a 5-year time horizon, and the staff will bring back that wording, put a stop sign in your frame of your video if you don't agree with that. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that we're all generally okay with that. Okay. Commissioner Redding, was that just a thumbs up?
Sorry, yeah, that was just a thumbs up and agreement
Okay.
with Director Gibbs and Commissioner Bailey.
Okay, great.
If I may, I have
Yes.
two more questions. One is the PVA upon downlisting or considering downlisting from T&E to non-game, I felt as though Mr. Odell felt that that was appropriate and endorsed that idea. Is that an accurate perception on my part?
Yes, that's reasonable.
Lastly, and I think probably the most significant, is the geographical component. What, that alters, that would alter the chart and the criteria for phase 2 to phase 3. And I think that, Eric was not as receptive to that. I think the staff would probably want to have pretty good guidance by the end of today, if that is something that is really supported by the majority of the commission. Adding a geographical component. The conclusion of phase 2 right now is a minimum count of 150 wolves anywhere for 2 successive years, or a minimum count of 200 wolves anywhere in Colorado with no temporal requirement. And the suggestion is to add a geographical component to that downlisting.
And I think I've heard that from Commissioner Touchton. I don't know that I've heard it from others. So, Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it could be just me, in which case, that's worth whatever it's worth. My thought, Jake, is the definition of a threatened species in Colorado includes that phrase throughout all, or I'm paraphrasing, a significant portion of its range. And I think we need to address that's a geographic look. There's some sort of geographic screen to not be a threatened species. And I think we need to address that in our downlisting or delisting criteria. Otherwise, we're subject to challenge for failing to look if it's threatened in a significant portion of its range. So it could be a narrative standard. It doesn't have to be a numeric standard, but I think we should have one. Sorry, I've got a screaming parrot, so I'm going to go take care of that, but I will be returning back.
So quick reply to Jay, it's disjunctive. The definition of threatened species is threatened species means any species or subspecies of wildlife which, as determined by the commission, is not in immediate jeopardy of extinction, but is vulnerable because it exists in such small numbers, or is so extremely restricted throughout all or a significant portion of its range that it may become endangered. So I think there are 2 tests, one of which relies on the range and the other does not. And it is as determined by the commission. So I don't think a geographical requirement is necessary to meet the definition.
Thank you, Counselor. I would just say I tend to agree, and Commissioner Bailey just put her hand down. So, Commissioner Blecka.
Never mind. Sorry.
Okay. Commissioner Redding.
Yeah, I do think that a distributional component would be useful. From my perspective, I'd like to see wolves distributed throughout the state so that they have their impact ecologically across the state and that the impacts are borne by everyone.
So I think that is leave it as the staff has recommended. Correct. Okay. Commissioner Haskett and then Commissioner Bailey.
I was just going to say, I don't think we can do a geographical distribution. I think the state is the state, and where they end up is where they end up. We have no control of that, but I think it's a statewide number. We don't need to change it to geographics.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bailey and then Commissioner Blecka.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I go back and forth with this, certainly recognizing, the need for, both the ecological outcomes associated with wolves in an ecosystem being distributed, and sort of the cost and benefits of having wolves on the ground being distributed as well. I struggle, I think, a little bit more with sort of describing that or what that looks like, right? I've heard kind of north and south of I-70, for example, and I do think, right, to the points that were made, there's lots of data to support that because of the territoriality, there's an expectation, right, that above a certain number, at a certain number, right, there's likelihood to be sort of that wolves will spread. I guess I would say I'm in support of a geographic component. I don't at this moment have a great thoughts on what that should be.
Commissioner Blecka.
Thank you. I was struggling how to say this. I don't support this. I don't support it because it didn't come from staff. I feel like they're the experts in this, and if they wanted it, if they felt it was important, it would already be part of the plan. I also wonder, like, do we ever have parameters like this on any other things that we've introduced? This is a predator, and I don't think there should be any more special considerations for this. Thank you.
Acting Director Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just raised lowered my hand a little bit too slowly. I'd like to not comment at this point.
Okay. So reading the tea leaves, sorry, Commissioner Phillips, please add some tea leaves to the mix.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on an iPad, so I'm struggling here. But I want to second what Commissioner Haskett and Commissioner Blecka said. I think it's a pretty tall order to try to, it feels like meddling, I guess, to try to, make sure wolves are evenly distributed. And it seems like a really hard thing to do. If there's not enough here, we capture and move them there or something like that. I don't understand it. And like they said, I don't support it.
Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Point of clarification for me, it was my understanding that the geographic component was not so that they're evenly distributed, but to include a criteria element of geography as it relates to delisting. So I don't know, I would love to get some clarification there. I misunderstood. I thought that we were talking about just making sure that there was an element of not the expectation that they would be geographically distributed across the landscape, especially in areas that is not appropriate for their habitat.
This may be a rabbit hole, but I'm going to look at Counselor Matter.
So I think that's part of the, I think that's part of the challenge. Right now, there is no geographical component, and the suggestion was there should be one, but there's no specificity to that, whether it's evenly distributed across the state or something else, or suitable habitat.
And again, we have been delivered a plan that where this was deliberated and debated by the SAG and the TWIG. Mm-hmm. So, just putting that out there, and it may this also may be one of those things that comes back in that 5-year time horizon once we know more, and honoring the suggestion as it's currently written and as the SAG and TWIG have recommended to us. Maybe one option as we straw poll this a little bit. Commissioner Touchton and then Commissioner Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just to, I wasn't talking about even distribution.
Thank you.
I was probably more
thank you, Jay.
At suitable habitat. And Eric made a good point that, wolves are territorial. If you had 200 wolves, that's maybe 20 packs. And he estimated that would fill 2.8 million acres with wolves. Just Moffat County is 3 million acres. So, we have a situation where all the wolves could be in one county. And I don't think that's what the citizens of the state wanted. It's probably not what the residents of that county want. So that, I think there's a way to look at a geographic distribution across a significant portion of the range without being too prescriptive or keeping us from making progress. The other way to get there, and I've also advocated for this, is bump the number 200 up. If you want to ensure geographic distribution, another way to get there is have more packs. Actually, in some sense, I was trying to be more compromising by just asking for a geographic component instead of asking for a higher threshold. But anyway, again, that's just my concern. And the chair has already said, don't go down this rabbit hole, Jay. So I will be quiet for now. And
we have
it's just
officially
something
gone
I
down
think we
it.
need to discuss.
We'll stay on it for another couple of minutes, and then we're going to trust our team to wrestle with this, and I'll see if I can get at least a litmus test on this. Commissioner Adams and then Commissioner Blecka.
Awesome, thank you. I raised my hand that second time because my question wasn't answered by the way I was asking I wanted clarification from those who had made the request. So thank you, Commissioner Tuxton, for clarifying that it wasn't equal distribution, because that was a misunderstanding. Some other commissioners had echoed that misunderstanding, and I wanted to get clarification. So thank you, Commissioner Tuxton, for that clarification. And yeah, I look forward to having more robust conversations around this topic as well. Unfortunately, I lost my train of thought, so I will turn it back over. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Blecka and then Commissioner Haskett, and then we're going to move on from this item.
I feel like this part of the conversation is micromanaging the work that's already been done prior to this point. And it is not success. It's not going to be successful to this plan at all. We need to be trusting the experts. We need to be trusting the people that put this plan together, all the volunteers, the last 2 years of all that work. If this was something that was important, I feel very confident it would already be included. So again, I'm just trying to break the cycle of micromanaging this plan from the commission side. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Haskett, and I'm going to those, I'll come back to the others that have spoken, and Commissioner Otero next.
Hang on one second here. I wrote it down so I could say it right. Now I can't get it to come up. Okay. I think that the geographic component is too ambiguous to write. How are we going to put any parameters on that? I mean, who's going to say that Moffat County has to have 50 or, Gunnison has to have 50? How are you going to figure that out? I don't think there's any way you can put a geographic component. They're going to go where they want to go to start with. I mean, we're starting in Gunnison. They're probably not going to stay in Gunnison. We already know that. How would we put parameters on that? I just don't know. I think that's a rabbit hole completely of, we have a number set. When we look at 200 on the ground, if we're actually going to visually see 200, which is what the plan says, we have way more than 200, because in Colorado and in the trees, you won't be able to see all of the animals that we actually have. I just think it's a mistake to try to do it that way. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Otero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just listening to all the input there, and I'm just curious. So, and I'm not sure if we can answer this tonight, but for the geographic component, if we do get to that, threshold number, that 200, and they're not, spread out in different areas, is that still the threshold number, and we just keep going forward? Or is that saying we have to, move the wolves around? And let's just say, just for the sake of, argument, that we do have that threshold number and they are spread out in different areas. Is that still acceptable, or are other commissioners advocating for still increasing the threshold number? I just wanted some clarification on that.
I don't think we have it at the moment. It's the clarification I have. But we'll try to come back and make sure that we understand each other. Commissioner Adams and then Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to also lift up that, yes, in addition to the incredible work of the SIG and the TWAG, the tag and the twig, and of course, all of the staff and those who have informed the development of this plan. I think it's also important to recognize that commissioners bring expertise and experience to this agency, and it feels disingenuous to have a double standard based on the topic. I have heard many, many times about the incredible expertise and experience that all of the commissioners have brought. And I think I'm noticing that there's a bit of a double standard sometimes, and I'm hopeful that we can do better in acknowledging that, you know, I'm not here to just rubber stamp what the staff says, right? I'm here to be an active participant. And when I hear Commissioner Redding, who this is his area of expertise, say, we need to consider a geographic element, I'm listening. So thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I think we're all respectful of each other's perspectives on these things. So thank you for that reminder, Commissioner May.
Thanks, Madam Chair. For me, one thing I have to keep in mind as we enter into this is that wolves are generalists, and they are going to go where the habitat is and where the prey is. And I think anything that we do to try to unnaturally manipulate that creates another burden on something that is going to create a problem as we do this. I think we do have a geographical component, and that's the state of Colorado. I think we need to allow the wolves to move to where the habitat and prey is going to be and try to stay out of that in order to have the best chance for success. Thank you.
Okay, so what I think we have is, and maybe Commissioner May just summarized one perspective, which is a geographic sort of boundary of the state. And we have another perspective, which I think Commissioner Touchton put out as sort of an alternative, which is some other defined geography. So unless that is not a good way of describing sort of two general alternatives, I don't know how to do this because we didn't really talk about kind of these litmus tests. But I will ask for just a show of hands for sort of generally the view of that Commissioner Touchton has described, which is to define some geographic area, and that's to be determined. Commissioner Touchton, I didn't hear you say exactly what that is, other than there is some geographic definition to that. Is that correct?
Just real quick to clarify, I'm not opposed to what Dallas just said. I think wolves should be allowed to go anywhere in the state, and they might. They are generalists. What I'm saying is, before we remove them from threatened status at 150 for 2 successive years or 200 in any 1 year, that I would like to add a geographic distribution. Throughout a significant portion of their suitable range is the phrase that I threw out. I'm not looking for something numeric. I'm not necessarily looking for relocations or some of the things, though we have frequently done that with other animals. But what I'm saying is, I don't think we've done our job if we only have wolves in 2.8 million acres of the state, all together. I think we need to have the wolves distributed, and then we can say they're on the road to self-sufficiency. But so if that helps clarify, it's geography and numbers for delisting.
And if we go from threatened and endangered to non-game at any point, it requires a commission vote years from now. So the plan is not self-executing. I mean, it's got those parameters in it already. So I don't know if that helps, doesn't help. Counselor Matter, if you'd like to chime in on that. I don't know if that helps us in this regard. I wonder if we're getting ahead of ourselves, because to the conversation that we had earlier, this is going to come back to the commission.
That's right.
Probably all of us are not on it any longer. So
that's right. I mean, the change in status at each of these steps requires a commission vote. This plan is important. It provides the high level description of what the plan is, but it does not constrain a future commission vote. if the commissioners believe there is inadequate distribution throughout the state at that time down the road, you can vote your conscience. The future commissioners can vote there along those lines.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure where to take this. There is the option to table is too strong, but to bring it back to us and have another conversation. This wasn't really an intended part of this conversation, or we can just take a litmus test based on, and maybe it's what Councilor Matter just put out there, is that, you know, is it some defined geographic distribution today, or is the state of Colorado the geographic distribution today, and that could change at a later time once we have more information? Is that clear enough in terms of what we're asking? So I'm just going to say, for a show of hands, maybe to make it simple, for those who would be supportive of leaving the plan as it is, as it's currently written, with the understanding of what Councilor Matter just described, and that is the commission would have the option at a later time to determine if there would be a change to that designation. So I will ask for that. If you can put a hand up if you support sort of moving forward with as it's currently written. Okay, I'm seeing Commissioners May, Blecha, myself, Commissioner Otero, Commissioner Phillips, Commissioner Haskett. Okay. Did I miss anybody? Commissioner Vardy. Okay, thank you for that. I think that math will be clear, but I don't want to leave the others out. So if for those of you who feel strongly about some defined geography in the plan that we approve in May, please indicate with a raise of your hand. Okay, so I see 4. Okay, so that's kind of where we are at the moment. We don't have green, red, yellow right now. I'm sorry, to be able to sort of draw consensus. Happy to bring it back if everyone can kind of live with the notion that the plan even could describe that there is an option, you know, in the future to look at this and to understand it as we have more research and we have more understanding of it. We can certainly footnote that. Okay, I'm seeing nods from commission. You know, I listened to the confirmation hearings today, and you said Redding, by the way. So I've changed how I call on you, Commissioner Redding, and now somebody's saying it's Commissioner Reading. I'm like, I heard him say
reading. No,
okay.
I never said reading. That was that was the. I never said reading. I mean Reading. That was the chair, Roberts.
Okay, thank you, because I heard somebody ask you, and I thought, well, I've been saying it wrong all along. So it is Commissioner. That's what I thought, Commissioner Reading. So I'm seeing nods from all of you with sort of the good faith that this conversation has been important to the process. And I'll just look to Reed and Eric and others and Jake to make sure that we sort of footnote that and remember that if at some time down the road we need to relook at this and wolves don't behave as Commissioner May might have suggested, they will, then we'll know that and we can take it back under advisement. Is that fair enough? Okay, great. Thank you for the thumbs up. Commissioner Haskett? You're on mute, so take yourself off mute.
Sorry. If you're done with that, I'd like to circle back to something. Are we done with this?
I think so. We can move on from this. Anything else for the parking lot?
Okay. So I just checked with staff because when we left Rifle, we were talking about ranch records versus vet records and part of the compensation. And we didn't really give them a clear direction on what we thought. It is standard practice, and most ranchers have I think it's called a red book, but Dallas, you would know this, a vet book where they keep their records on, you know, vaccinations, on preg chest checking and those type of things, because not all of us have vets that can come to our places. But I guess I would like to give staff some direction on what we think about that, if everybody else is in agreement anyway.
Okay, so I'm just going to speculate based on the conversation that, and maybe I'll just throw it out there for purposes of this discussion, that ranch records seem to be reasonable as we had that conversation, at least as I read the room and rifle. If anyone disagrees strongly with that, can you put your hand up or jump in? Okay, seeing none, I think that's probably the direction, Commissioner Haskett. So we can take that off the list. Anything else from you? Okay, the only other thing I would love to put in the parking lot, which I know is a big one, and we've heard it a lot from the public, is just the costs of all this. We're printing money. I think, you know, we're trying to be very projective as much as we can. And I'm not asking for an answer tonight. And at some point, some best estimates, ranges, understanding as we get to a point of compensation levels, whatever this is. The Proposition 114 did not adequately estimate what this was going to cost. And I think for pure transparency and understanding by the public, at some point we need to get to some number so that we have some confidence moving forward that the plan will be funded. And so whatever that looks like, and the plan can have the stipulation that it be funded. And, you know, if we're just guessing, that's not probably very helpful. So I hope that we'll see some of those estimates, even if they're the best we can do at the time. Again, those will evolve as we know more as we go along. So that's just my request for the parking lot for a future time. And I'm not sure who would put that together. Probably Justin would be helping with that and others. So, okay, great. Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly on the ranch records, I'm fine with ranch records as long as we keep the preponderance of the evidence standard. I think the way we should do this is we gather all the evidence that's available. If someone's got vet records, great. If they've only got their handwritten notes, that's what we've got, and we just make an evaluation based on all the evidence that we can gather. But I think it is important that we have a standard, and that's preponderance of the evidence. And then on the money point that Commissioner Hauser just raised, the draft EIS on the 10J rule came out today, and they did put some numbers on estimated cattle deaths and the value of those cattle. So there's a starting point. They probably weren't contemplating as generous a compensation program as we seem to be devising, but they were just looking at market value of the animals. So we'd have to adjust it somewhat. But anyway, I think we could, I'd like to see staff or see if we think the Fed's got those numbers right, because at least it's a starting point about what the program might cost, at least in terms of the compensation piece, not so much the other things. But anyway, it's just an idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchton, Commissioner Adams, and then Commissioner May. Commissioner Adams, you went, put your hand down. Are you in? Okay, it's down. Okay, Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess what I would ask for, excuse me, is if we could maybe receive some clarification, some opinions as to whether or not the law does emphasize that conflict prevention and compensation requires funding from the General Assembly for both or not. Is that somewhere where we can receive some clarification?
Yeah, that's definitely part of at least the cost question. and I'll turn to Executive Director Gibbs at the end, and he can play sweep on any of this stuff. Commissioner
Madam
Adam,
Chair, if I,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, if I might expound on that.
Yeah, please.
One thing I wanted to clarify is that I'd heard some things since the last meeting that, for example, if we raise the compensation to 15,000 per animal, that all of a sudden every animal that was lost was going to be worth 15,000. I think we need to absolutely clarify that it is still fair market value. If there is a $1,200 animal that is lost, that animal is $1,200. It's going to require proof of value, and there's not going to be compensation over and above any value. Even though we are talking about raising the levels and raising the maximum, that will not come into effect unless an animal is at that level. So I really think we need to emphasize the fact that even though we're talking about changing the maximum values, I do not believe that has any major effect on our compensation program. I think we're only doing this in extreme cases. That is assurance to producers that have animals that are higher value than that we're going to take care of it. And as I've said ad nauseum, that's what the statute says, that we will pay fair compensation for losses. And I think we have to hold true to the language of the statute.
I'm seeing lots of nods, Commissioner May, and I certainly understand that that's a ceiling. We raised the ceiling, and the range can be anywhere from 0 to that ceiling based on those calculations. So I'm just kind of looking around and getting nods on that. Okay, Commissioner Adams.
Sorry, I'm on my phone as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just lift up, that actually was an area I wanted to bring up again. It was my understanding that it is written that the conflict prevention should be the primary activity in the wolf restoration and management, according to CRS 332.105.8. And so I actually had it as something I wanted to raise here again. And Commissioner Hauser, you mentioned this as well, which is just the fiscal components around the conflict minimization program, both for resources and time. And in addition to that, just really, I look back at the SAG consensus recommendations in Appendix C, pages C11 through 14, and there was much more detail than is provided in the plan. So I would love a revisit of the current plan and the SAG recommendations, and perhaps making that section a little bit more robust. Thank you, as well as the costs indicated in the cost projections. Thank you.
Yep. All these different cost components, for sure. Thanks for flagging that. Okay, we are at 8:30. So I am going to turn it to Executive Director Gibbs first, and then a closing comment for Acting Director Dugan, and then anything else that we should expect for February 22nd next week, if Reed or Eric, anyone wants to bring us home. So Executive Director Gibbs, anything from you?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, really, thank you, everyone. Thank you for staff for working so hard on this. Thank you to all the commissioners and to the public for weighing in. It's 8:30, 2 or so on a Thursday night. And I know it's not easy to have these night meetings, but I know it's very much appreciated for the general public, for folks that are, working during the day. And it's nice to have this option for everyone to participate if they'd like to. So just a big thank you. I know we've had a lot of discussions on funding. We can maybe have Justin address that maybe again next week. We do, just for clarification, again, we do have $2.1 million that is part of general fund dollars that is within the long bill, which is in the general budget bill. And I would describe the phase we're in as the planning stage. And, these meetings are part of that planning stage, as you all know. And once we start moving in towards the implementation stage, we can still have that $2.1 million because it's part of CPW's base budget, part of, again, the long bill. And, as we progress and, manage wolves in the landscape, we're going to have a better idea too of what that dollar amount may look like, and so I think we need to be adaptive and really look at, what is needed in the future, but there's some information we just don't quite know yet. But I will tell you, $2.1 million right now is what we need for this stage of the process right now. And so I'm very confident that the budget will pass this year and we'll get $2.1 million. And that's, again, part of the base budget. So we expect that to be more or less perpetual as long as the legislators support that dollar amount. So just like any different year in the budget, we could request more money for certain programs, less money or whatever. But again, there's $2.1 million. So when folks say there's no money, that's just not accurate. There's $2.1 million as long as the budget passes. But again, thanks everyone for your feedback, and look forward to seeing everyone in person next week.
Okay, great. And just in case I've never said there isn't money. I think we need to go into this with the best understanding we have of what the costs are going to be. And that's pretty unclear at this point, based on sort of this is an iterative process. So I'm just hopeful that we have some better direction and understanding about what those ranges potentially could be once we get close to the final plan. Acting Director Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to express my appreciation to the commission and to staff, particularly over the last two meetings, and especially the discussion tonight, the thought that was generated. We talk about how this is adaptive, and this was just a case in point of this being an adaptive situation for us. And so I just want to make a couple of points. First of all, we're not going to be doing this or implementing the wolf management plan on just in a vacuum. We're going to be doing periodic updates with the commission. I think that's very important. So, the 5 years is important to revisit, but it's going to be a lot more than just every 5 years. These milestones are not going to occur in a vacuum. And so you are definitely partners with us in seeing how this all plays out. I really appreciate your flexibility and the thoughtful discussion. And I just am really looking forward to having more discussion next week. Thanks.
Okay, anything else from Reed, Eric? Anything we should think about for next week?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned earlier, there'll be some revised language I would just recommend the commission look at, and that's based off recommendations in Rifle. I think that will be helpful to the discussion. And then those question and answer documents are available as well for you for that next meeting. I would say if there's any questions that you have that we somehow forgot, definitely reach out to me and get them to me as ASAP. But I think we covered most of them, but there were a lot of questions, but we've tried to cover as many as we can. And then just thank you for the continued support and involvement here. We very much appreciate it.
Okay, and we are reminded tonight of some of the limitations of being on a checkerboard screen. So thank you for your tolerance and patience in that. We sort of remiss of congratulating Commissioners Reading, Otero, and Vardy on their successful confirmation, at least through the Senate Ag. They still all get to go to the big body, but they were all in Senate Ag today and voted through that process. So want to congratulate them. There were GOCO board members up as well as a couple of tourism board members. So congratulations to the three of you as well as we conclude the evening. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, look forward to seeing everyone next week at the Adams County Fairgrounds on February 22nd. And thank you again to the staff and the team, and certainly to the public for joining us tonight. We are most grateful. It is very helpful. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.